That's fine.
Yeah, I'm really sorry about that.
No, it's 9.
Good days. Good morning. Oh,
Yeah, just
sorry,
stump on
Heather.
my foot,
Good
Steve.
morning. Good morning. Is my microphone on? My microphone.
Good morning.
That's a brilliant start. It turns out if you press the on button, it really works. Hello? Anything? Hello. Good morning. So I think last night we may have some thick heads this morning, so I'm sure people are going to sort of trickle in as we start this morning. But welcome anyway. It was a good night last night, I think. Enjoyed Red Door. I'm quite pleased I left when I did. Have we got anybody who stayed later? Oh, there's a few. There's a few. It's all good. What time do we leave? Well, welcome anyway. So this morning, I'm delighted to have Heather Burns back. So Heather spoke at the first CODEMOBILE 2 years ago. She had some fantastic feedback from everyone. Her talk was absolutely brilliant. Was due to come back last year, but unfortunately had to pull out. But I was really keen to see if we could get her back this year. I think the information she has and the content she produces is absolutely top-notch. And we were just chatting yesterday, and I think you were saying that you'd been reviewing some of the slides you'd given 2 years ago, and it was almost like a talk that could have been given 10 years ago. So really excited to see what our update is this year. So please put your hands together and welcome Heather Burns.
Thank you, Steve. Just let everyone sit down. Good morning, everyone. I don't know how to follow that. That was really quite kind. Thank you, Steve. So this morning, we're going to have a talk about everything that's happened in the past 2 years since I last spoke with you. And as Steve said, it's the slides I gave here in 2016, they're unrecognizable. We've had so much happen in our work, so much happen in the world. And I thought that today might be a good opportunity to just sort of pull back and look at the bigger picture and see what can we do outside the code level to sort of get things back on track. So who am I? You can find me on Twitter at WebDevLaw. I am a tech policy and regulation specialist. That means I work to build bridges between coders, developers, digital agencies, projects, and policymakers and legislators. I used to be a web designer, and then I saw the light. I'm an active member of the WordPress.org core privacy team, working to create stronger privacy standards for 33.4% of the sites on the open web. I've also recently helped to set up a working group of the privacy teams working across all the major open source content management systems, so Drupal, Joomla, WordPress, Umbraco, so that we can create a better standard of privacy for, I think, something like 60% of the sites on the open web. That's a really rewarding initiative to be a part of, and I was actually selected for the Mozilla Open Leaders training program to help support that group, so they've got me very busy. I also do a lot of work on accessibility law, and this year I've been kind of head down in Brexit. I'm actually grateful to this conference for getting me out of it for 2 days. So if there's any way I can help you and your companies and your projects with any of that, you are welcome to hire me. And I will say that I'm not a lawyer, and none of what we're going to discuss today should be taken as legal advice. As Steve said, I spoke with you 2 years ago, and I was scheduled to be here last year. And very shortly before the conference, I got completely blindsided by a pretty horrendous, life-changing personal emergency. And it was the first and only time I've ever had to cancel out of a conference in my life. So it really does mean a lot to me personally to have come through it a year later to be with you today. And if you haven't been through an experience like that in your life, you will. And it was a good reminder that things always don't work out as we planned. Things you've put your entire adult life into doing and achieving can fall apart in the space of a morning. And sometimes when I look at everything that's happened in online privacy, online ethics, the world around us in the past 2 years, I feel like that's what happened to me is applicable to what happened to you. Somewhere along the line, we lost control of our own craft. We lost control of our own work. Things we used to hold dear were taken away from us. It has been precisely 0 days since a privacy scandal. The latest one bubbled up literally during dinner last night. I thought it was the other Facebook thing. It's a new Facebook thing. It's the Facebook crisis du jour. Just since I spoke with you 2 years ago, so many scandals and incidents have come out, not constrained to, but largely around the mobile space. We had the Cambridge Analytica scandal, which I'm sure you all followed, when game apps shared with people's friends turned out to be payloading the gaming of an election. We had the recent study by the Yale Privacy Lab and the French Exodus Privacy Group that showed that 75% of apps contain ridiculous amounts of trackers and questionable permissions. We've had things like research showing that many apps contain Facebook analytics kits which send information about you to Facebook the minute you start up the app, even if you don't have a Facebook account. I very much consider my role as one of a diplomat. I don't want to push people apart. I want to bring them together. And that involves talking to people, talking to different audiences from different perspectives, and learning what we all understand about each other so that we can move forward together. And I speak with a lot of full-time data protection professionals, data protection officers, data protection lawyers, privacy lawyers on both sides of the Atlantic about where they feel the problems lie in all of these scandals and incidents. And I hate to tell you, but they don't say very nice things about you. I've heard you developers called lazy. I've heard them call you ignorant. I've heard them call you unprofessional. I've heard them call you useful idiots, that you're all foot soldiers doing Facebook and Google's bidding for them in your enlightened ignorance. I don't believe that about you for a second. Okay, I've seen some of you guys in the pub, but I don't believe you're lazy. I don't believe you're all part of some global conspiracy to do Mark Zuckerberg's bidding. I think you're pretty awesome. And the reason I think you're pretty awesome is because you are people of enormous power and influence over privacy on the web. The decisions you make in your projects, in your workflows, in your code, can help protect people from the misuses of their data by people who would use that data to hurt them. The most amazing thing you do as a developer won't be an app with gazillions of downloads or the latest feature. The most amazing thing you ever do will never be heard about because it will never happen. Because you'll have done something to prevent a scandal. You'll have done something to prevent data from leaking. You'll have done something to prevent people from being hurt by the abuses of their data. That is real developer superpower. So how can you, just people sitting in front of a laptop bashing some code, be a part of a movement? How can you, working in your projects, in your companies, in your organizations, individually and together as professionals, reclaim mobile development from those who have abused it and continue to abuse it for their own ends? What I'm going to share with you is 3 lessons that I have learned from being on the road a lot in the past 2 years, working with groups, working with projects, working with individuals, working on the other side, working with lawyers and privacy advocates, about where I feel the 3 areas are where we could all make a difference working together. The first is kind of obvious, but it's to understand each other. And I have to hold my hand up here and admit that this was my biggest fault. This was the biggest mistake I made. I didn't understand who I was speaking with. I didn't understand where we were all coming from. I do now, and that's what I want to share it with you. Software, whether it's an open source content management system, a JS library, or a mobile app, it's made by those of us who show up. And the thing is, we don't have a clue about each other. People who work in the same teams, whether that's in the same room or distributed on Slack, can work with each other for years and never understand each other, because we have very different cultural approaches to privacy. For better or for worse, most of the work we do is transatlantic. It's in Europe, it's in the United States. And these two are quite literally an ocean apart. We are in Europe for now, sorry, and in Europe we have a certain cultural approach to privacy. We hold privacy to be a fundamental human right. We hold that personal data belongs to the subject. It belongs to the person it is about. We have a culture of opting in, which is you cannot use my personal data unless I have given you permission to do so. We have a culture of constructive work through regulators, with fines or court action a rare last resort. We have an increasingly resourced and efficient data protection regulator, as all European countries do, which deal with these on the civil level so that you don't have these sort of Americanized lawsuits and see you in court things. And we very much have a culture where people trust governments and fear businesses. This is the complete opposite of the American cultural approach to privacy. That approach holds that free speech, not privacy, is a fundamental human right. And in court action, privacy is very often held to be an impediment to free speech. That cultural approach also holds that data belongs to the website or service owner. If your company has data about someone, it's yours, not theirs. There is an opt-out culture, which is they hold the right to take your data and you have to ask for it to be released later on. They very much have that see you in court culture of adversarial courtroom litigation because they don't have regulators. So court is the first resort. The lawyer is the first resort. And completely opposite to the European culture, people fear governments and trust businesses. That's not to say Americans view companies as benevolent, but they genuinely fear government intervention more than they fear the worst abuses of the worst businesses. So these cultural differences we work with were born from very different historical approaches. The European historical approach to privacy was born out of a collective and social approach. We hold that human rights come first and individual rights come second. And that's because we've learned the hard way. We have a pretty horrendous legacy. Last year, in the space of 6 weeks, I spoke in Northern Ireland, the Netherlands, and Serbia. Those are 3 places which have had actual genocides. They have had the liquidation of civilian populations. They have had attacks on people. They have had persecutions. They have had civilian warfare because of who people are. That is why we take this historical approach. Our approach is a form of atonement. Our approach is learning what we did wrong the first time and doing what we can to make sure it doesn't happen again. But they've never had that in America yet. They have an individual approach that holds that the individual comes before the human rights. This is born out of what's called the East Coast Puritan legacy, which if you think of the settlers in the colonies on the East Coast in the 1600s, very much held the belief that there is no private life. Everything you do should be public. And if you want to keep something to yourself, it's probably because you're a sinner. But then that crashed into the West Coast frontier legacy, your cowboys on the open range, which believes in the freedom to do whatever you want, whenever you want, without your consent. The world is yours for the taking. When that crashes into the nosy Puritan mentality, it's kind of ugly. And those historical approaches led to very different legal approaches to privacy. In Europe, we hold that privacy is regulated through hard law. I spoke with you 2 years ago about GDPR. That's how we do it here. And that's one overarching law for all member states and sectors. We have data protection regulators like the ICO. If you work in Europe, you'll have your own. We hold that those privacy rights are not tied to citizenship and nationality. If you're a Canadian sitting in this room right now, any data you're dealing with right now, this applies to you. You don't have to prove where you come from. You don't have to prove you're a citizen. It applies to you if you're physically on the ground, or even not, as we'll see later. We have privacy as its own law. It is its own set of disciplines and statutes with its own lawyers, and litigation is the last resort. You don't see things going to court because we have all of that in front of us. Again, completely opposite of the American approach, which holds that privacy is governed through soft law. They don't have any overarching data protection law. It's a piecemeal approach across sectors and states. You've heard of COPPA about children's data. You've heard about HIPAA, about health data. You may have heard about the California Consumer Privacy Act, which comes in later this year. But they don't have anything like GDPR. The way your data is handled depends on where the person was when that data came up. So because they don't have a federal privacy law, they don't have a data protection regulator, because you can't regulate without something to regulate. They are starting to talk about a federal privacy law. I think They're going to have one in maybe 2 years, and you're going to be all bloody thankful that you listened to my GDPR talk then, because you'll have to do it all over again. But for now, they don't have anything like ours. And the legal approach is very much tied to citizenship and nationality, which is why you have people going apoplectic saying, GDPR, why do I have to follow that? I'm in California. But they don't understand that it's rights-based, it's citizenship-based there. Privacy is a very small set of its own law. Most of it has been shoehorned into other things. So the closest thing to a data protection regulator you have in the States is the FCC, which is the Federal Communications Commission, which was set up to deal with things like radio waves and who gets to license a radio station. So they're still shoehorning issues of online privacy in 2019 into basically stuff dealt for the telegram era. So it's a subcategory of contract, tort, or even property law. And of course, see you in court, sue first, ask questions later. I have explained all these details about our legal, cultural, and historical approaches not to drive you apart, but to help you understand how the people on your team, in your company, in your project think, because we all come to the table with a different understanding of what privacy is and how it works. And we've never understood our differences, much less acknowledged them. So what's the result of that? How are these privacy scandals born? This is the part where we become culpable. But because we don't understand our differences, we structure our work with different cultural approaches to privacy. We write our code with different legal approaches to privacy. We assume everyone we code with works and thinks like we do. So we create the open web with no common standard or understanding of privacy. And we fail to do everything we can do to protect the people and the data. And we don't learn from our mistakes, or at least we didn't until this talk, because now you know that you have to do better. So that's my first lesson for you today, that you have to understand where your team has come from on issues of privacy and culture and ethics and values and legacy before you can know where you're going. So where are you going? That's my second lesson for you today. The second thing we can do to reclaim our craft from those who would abuse it is to hold ourselves accountable. You may have seen this quote. I've taken it slightly out of context, but I won't later. Stay tuned. That the era of move fast and break things is over. The era of act first, ask permission. I don't remember the quote. It's done. It has to be done. But how do you do that in practice? So I'm going to give you a few practical tools you can use today, tomorrow, right now, in your work, in your studios, in your code, in your projects, to help be more accountable to yourselves, to regulators, and to the people in your data. The first is the Privacy by Design framework. It's a non-regulatory development framework devised in Canada in the 90s. And it's remarkable because if you look at the document now, you would think it was written today. It's brilliant. It's timeless. Privacy by design, the principle of it was incorporated to GDPR as a requirement. You have to be doing this now. I'd encourage you to review your existing projects for good PBD practice, retrofit if you need to, and make this a part of your development workflow going forward. I've written a very long guide to it at Smashing Magazine, which you can read on your own time. I'll share the slides in the Slack later. So what's the Privacy by Design framework? It has 7 principles. These are all incredibly obvious common sense. You may be doing this already. You may be doing some of it. The point of this is to think of it as a holistic framework. PBD holds that privacy must be proactive, not reactive. You have to anticipate privacy users before they reach the user. Don't put plasters after the mistakes have been made. And privacy must also be preventive, not remedial. Stop the silly issues from ever happening in the first place. Privacy must be the default setting. The user should not have to take actions to secure their privacy. They shouldn't have to flick a switch, choose an option, go into settings to activate their privacy, and God forbid they should not have to pay a premium, buy an add-on. It should be default. Consent for data sharing on anything should not be assumed. Privacy should be built into design as a core function, not an add-on, hence work on content management systems' core privacy teams. It should be positive sum. What that means is the privacy by design framework seeks to avoid dichotomies. There's no trade-off. There's no trade-off between privacy and security. There's no trade-off between privacy and service offering. You can have both. You can do both. But you have to have a healthy respect for the user privacy. It should be end-to-end. That's about life cycle protection. Data collection, data minimization, data retention, data deletion. Collect the bare minimum you need, use it for the minimum purpose you need, store it for the minimum time you need, get rid of it when you don't need it anymore. PBD and the way you deal with privacy should be open. The things you do should be transparent, public, visible, and publicly accountable. That means your privacy notices, that means your development principles. Nobody should have to go through a regulator, file an FOI to find out what you're doing with their data. Nobody should have to get you in front of the House of Commons or Parliament to find out what your principles are. And it must be user-centric. Granular privacy options, maximize privacy defaults, detailed privacy information notices, user-friendly options, clear notifications of changes, because it's not about you, it's about the people. The ICO, which is the UK's data protection regulator, has a couple of really good questions on their website. They've really made an effort to increase the resources available. They have some questions to check yourself on PBD, and they're common sense, you know. We anticipate risks and privacy invasive events before they occur and take steps to prevent harm to individuals. That means the bit where you sit around a table and ask really uncomfortable, ugly questions. What would happen if this data was misused? What if we have a rogue employee? What if Facebook can't be trusted with the analytics kit we're using? When we use other systems, services, or products in our processing activities, we make sure that we only use those whose designers and manufacturers take data protection into account. That means being really careful about who you work with, whether that's a code library or a partner organization. Because if something happens under the new framework, you're both accountable. If you followed everything to the letter, but you partnered with a dodgy subcontractor, guess what? Again, common sense. So how do you get started on PBD within a specific project? You do a document called a Privacy Impact Assessment. It's a living document which must be accessible to everyone from your board level to the lowest coder down. It's where you document what you're doing on a project, why you're doing it, and what you've done to identify and mitigate the risks. And you do this before you've ever done a line of code. You do this halfway through the project. You do this when you're changing the project. You do it towards the end of the project. The article I wrote on Smashing Magazine has some good prompts to get you started on a PIA. There are templates available, but I don't want anyone to ever think in terms of a template mentality. It's not a tick box, it's not a checklist. Get your prompts in order, but adapt it to your needs. I would recommend adapting a PIA template to your projects, to your companies, to your ways of working, and use them all the time. The areas for those general prompts would be questions about data collection and retention, subject access rights, which is how people find out what data you hold about them and how you're using it. Legal, have you covered your bases on all the legal issues in the places where you do business? Your human and technical security, who has access to this data, why, what do you do to protect it? The risks, and I'm going to flesh this one out into example, personnel, staff, and contributors. This goes beyond the sort of human and technical security about who has access to your data. This is about what you know. This is about, to go back to my first point, the knowledge you bring to the table. Because, God forbid, but in the event of a question about your company's data practices, a data breach, a scandal, the regulator is going to come to you and say, can we please see a copy of your privacy impact assessment? And if your response to that question is, what's a privacy impact assessment, you have two problems. But one of the things they're going to look for in the event of a concern about your privacy practices is, what do the people working on the project know? Who's that? Who has access to the data? What data protection training have those individuals received? What security measures do those individuals work with? What data breach notification and alert procedures are in place? What procedures are in place for government requests? So this is where you're thinking ahead to when things go horribly wrong, and you don't have any of these answers in place. That's not the time to think about those questions. The time to think about them is now. To flesh out that second question, what data protection training have those individuals received? In the event of a concern, an angry regulator is going to want to know if the people who worked on your app are competent in the European Data Protection and Privacy Framework, any industry or sector regulations you have to work with. So I'm presuming Compare the Meerkat would be regulated by the Financial Services Authority. There may be additional financial regulations on data and privacy you might have to follow over and above GDPR. And of course, a big company like them will have that in place through their legal team. Smaller agencies, not so much. So if you're subcontracting to work on something like a health app, you need to make sure that you're following any regulations to the medical industry in addition to GDPR. Development frameworks and methodologies. GDPR doesn't tell you what to do or how to code, but it tells you, decide what you're doing, stick with it, and document it. Document that training in your HR records. Do occasional inductions and refreshers. That's something I do. I come into teams and I give them training on GDPR. I give them refreshers on how things have changed. Because again, when the proverbial hits the fan and you don't have any answers to these questions, you've got a much bigger problem than a data breach. So those are just two tools to get you started on being more accountable to yourselves, to regulators, and to the people in the data. Review what you do, review why you do it, review who does it, and review what they know. Document it, document all of it, document it all the time. Document it or it didn't happen. So we've talked about culture. We've talked about tools. And now we're going to talk about something that I've just really become cognizant of in the past year. Because we're all talking about ethics. Xavier gave a fantastic presentation. I was looking at your slides on the train yesterday. They were brilliant about ethics. And it's wonderful to me that everyone is thinking in terms of becoming more ethical developers, becoming more ethical projects, becoming more ethical companies. But I need to tell you that ethics aren't enough. And there is a tipping point where the discussion about ethics becomes something it's not meant to be. I used this quote out of context earlier: the era of move fast and break things is over. The full quote is, the era of move fast and break things is over. It's intellectually inconsistent to preach about a disruptive billion-dollar vision and imagine it as being free from regulatory considerations. It fascinates me how often entrepreneurs lack a basic grounding in the regulatory hurdles they may face. Right now, ethics are really important. They're trendy, they're kind of sexy. Talking about ethics makes you look really on brand. Talking about GDPR and CCPA makes you look like a geek who has no friends and everyone wants to avoid you in the pub. But they're two sides of the same coin. Ethics give us the tools to take a critical look at how we make decisions and to determine whether they grant users agency, rights, protections, and the opportunity to flourish. Yet ethics do not stand alone. They merely lay the foundations for larger frameworks of social contracts encompassing policy, governance, law, and human rights. This is a quote from an article a friend of mine have recently written, which is being published any day now. I was hoping it would have been published by now. And we'll come back to it. Because what we're talking about in this article is something called ethics washing. Ethics washing is a recognized phenomenon. And it's what happens when ethics are devised and adopted in lieu of a healthy approach to privacy laws and regulations. This is when everyone starts talking about ethics, not to complement privacy laws, but to get around them. Because if you're talking about ethics, you must be pretty awesome. aren't you? So when Google was found shoving hundreds of thousands of people's medical records into the DeepMind AI system without their knowledge or consent, they said, but we're trying to help the NHS. Who wouldn't want to help the NHS? That's ethics washing in action. Mr. Zuckerberg, it's been, half hour since I last mentioned you, coming out the other day with this bizarre 4-point editorial on how Facebook would like to jump on the ethics bandwagon on privacy, and the Information Commissioner herself came out with a cracking mic drop and said, if you really believe that, how about paying your £500,000 fine for the last privacy law you violated? Ethics washing is when people hijack the ethics debate to use it for something else. It's the opposite of good ethical process, and it actually increases your governance risks to your projects, to your companies, because it creates this, almost this race to the bottom, where everyone wants to adopt the sort of vaguest, airy-fairyest, weakest, and sometimes actually privacy invasive practices possible to code it in some sort of value statement and then frame those gestures as some sort of laudable achievement. It lets villains play the hero. But from my perspective, it also signals a belief that projects are above the law. Because yeah, there's that privacy law we ignored since 1995, but here's our new ethical code for dealing with people. To which I would say, if you look at a lot of the scandals that we've had to deal with in our work, 75% of them were actually about not following the privacy law that had been there since the 90s. So I don't like this trend of projects acting like they can mark their own homework by devising a code of ethics as a substitute for healthy legal compliance. But the worst thing about it is it shifts the moral responsibility for safeguarding privacy from the project to the user. Privacy law has your back. A code of ethics does not. A privacy framework is externally accountable, has a regulator, you have rights, you have recourse. What recourse do you have against a code of ethics cooked up at a corporate retreat? You don't. I don't want to sound like I'm hostile to the ethics trend. I'm not. I think it's wonderful. But I have to put my hand up and say how badly I'm seeing it being abused by so many people right now. Ethics washing isn't something I made up. It is an academically recognized phenomenon. There's a professor at Vienna University called Ben Wagner who's done fantastic work on it. And he's put out 6 tests to safeguard and check yourselves that any work you're doing on ethics is not in fact ethics washing. Are you engaging externally? You know, this can't be something you cooked up yourself. It has to be externally accountable. And that means oversight. That means someone challenging you on it. You've got to be clear on why you've made these decisions. You have to pin your framework to non-arbitrary external standards, whether that's a company or not a company code of ethics, a regulatory body's code, or privacy law. There must be a clear indication that selected ethics do not substitute for fundamental human or citizen rights. And there must be a clear statement on how your ethics relate to a legal framework. And what do you do when they're in conflict? That sixth question in this test is almost impossible to pass. That's your tripwire, as it should be. As we've said in that article, we owe it to ourselves and our users to use ethics the right way, to help shape the privacy rules and regulations which govern our craft, to differentiate between best practices and the rule of law, and to ensure the paths that we carve for our users lead to human flourishing. And we owe it to ourselves to understand the important role ethics can play and learn to use them to build better futures rather than exploit the trend to use them as a loophole around the law and the rights it grants our users. I want you to all think about ethics every day in everything you do, but I also want you to think about privacy law. I want you to think about the ways you will constrain yourselves and your projects and the people you work with from committing abuses which can be exploited. The friend I've written this article with is called Morten Rand Hendrickson. I want you all to watch this conference talk that he gave last year at WordCamp Europe in Belgrade. I was in the audience. I was a mess. I watched grown men weeping at this talk on ethics and development and design, and it's the most amazing thing you'll ever see, and I'll share this later. That's my 3 tests for you and tips on how to reclaim your craft, take back control, I'm sorry, from people who would misuse the data we hold and misuse you, exploit you really for their own ends. I want you to better understand each other and the people on your teams, the people on your Slacks, the people in your projects, what you all understand, what you bring to the table, where you're all coming from, so that you can understand where you need to go together in terms of holding yourself accountable through toolkits, through frameworks, through practical action to do something meaningful. And I want you to remember that ethics aren't enough. Please do everything you do in an ethical manner, but make sure you're backing it up with something. And I'll repeat what I said earlier, because I really do believe it. You are people of enormous power and influence over privacy on the web. The actions you take within your projects, within your apps, within your companies, however small, can protect the people in the data from those who would use that data to hurt them. Let's work together to reclaim our craft. That's the end of my talk, but I hope it's the start of the dialogue. I want you all to talk to me today about what problems you're having in your projects, in your companies, what I can do to help you move forward. My train is until 5 o'clock, so please get me for a coffee, and let's keep the dialogue going after the conference. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
I can't see you.
No, yeah, I was up there yesterday. You can't see anything. Just pretend. So I'm from the USA, and I've been looking at GDPR sort of externally and thought, yeah, I think it will come to the United States in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
I'm less optimistic than you are. I think in the 5 to 10 year time frame, not 2 years, even though that'd be great and brilliant. But as somebody looking at things from your perspective, what do you think might be the biggest barriers to adopting something like that in the United States?
So, first thing I'm going to say is you have a practice run coming up, which is CCPA, the California law. If you did what you needed to do to come into healthy compliance with GDPR, you're about 80% of the way to CCPA. So CCPA is something California has put in, and it applies to any company over a certain size and turnover which holds data on Californians. So if you're in Florida and you have a certain amount of Californian customers, you have to do that. And it does 2 things. It sort of proves why GDPR was a really good set of standards to follow, but it also sets the stage for that federal privacy law. Because it's great that California's passed a law, and it's great that Vermont wants to pass a law, and we can go on. But what's going to happen is you're going to have 50 laws. And this is why we have 1 law in Europe for 500 million people. So the move towards a federal privacy law is as much about making things easier for yourselves, because even you know, the libertarians and the Republicans who have traditionally resisted this stuff tooth and nail agree. We can't have people trying to figure out which one of 50 laws to follow. So that is one of the answers to your question. It's that there's that resistance to any legislation at all. But it is the direction of travel. And I think people are finally coming on board with the idea that we've got to do something, and better to do one thing than 50 things. So there were some hearings held in the House and the Senate last week. There's lots of work going on in the shape of an eventual federal law. There's lobbying. I have an entire physical notebook at home devoted to researching all the draft statutes and frameworks. There's 30 of them. If I didn't have to deal with Brexit, I could do nothing but look at US federal privacy law. It's complex, but it's coming. So what I would advise you is to keep up with CCPA, keep up with GDPR, and then when a US federal privacy law comes in, you'll be almost there already. But the obstacles are, as I said, those cultural, legal, and historical issues, and the sheer amount of effort in doing 1 law as opposed to 50. But I'm happy to talk to you more afterwards.
Thank you.
Anyone else? No? In that case, please show your appreciation for Heather.
Thank you very much.
Awesome, thank you very much. It's okay, you're wicked, thank you. Cool, so just before we go on to our next talk, just to draw your attention to something that's going to happen a little bit later on this morning. I mentioned this on the first day. Every year at CODEMOBILE, we've got this little tradition where we have CODEMOBILE Has Talent. If you don't know what CODEMOBILE Has Talent is, it's essentially our talent show, where we invite members of our wonderful audience, all of our attendees, our speakers, to showcase something that they want to share with the group. It doesn't have to be tech related, but could be. To give you some examples of what we've had in the past, in year one we had Boone from Canada who backflipped across the stage. That was very good. Last year Polly knitted for us. So there's any number of talents that can be showcased. And we do have a prize donated by Code Nation. We've got an Echo Dot to give away to the most talented CODEMOBILE attendee. So if you are a talented person, which I'm sure you all are, and would like to showcase your talent, then after Bushra's talk, if you grab me, just let me know you would like to showcase talent, and at 11 o'clock we'll do CODEMOBILE's Got Talent and see who our most talented person is. It's one of my favourite parts of the conference, so I'm excited to see what talents we might find within the group. So moving swiftly on, we're now going to go to our second presentation of the morning. So we have Bushra, who is going to talk around creating machine learning powered applications. So please welcome Bushra.
Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about how to create machine learning powered applications with Google's MLKit. Before starting, let me introduce myself. I am Bushra. I am an Android engineer at Deb Business, which is a London-based company. And also, I quite like being a part of developer communities. I'm one of the organizers of GDG London, and I am one of the VTM London lead currently. And you can find me with Busra Deniz Twitter handle. Today, I'm going to mostly talk about Google's new shiny tool, MLKit. It's basic capabilities and how to use custom TensorFlow Lite models with MLKit. But before starting, I just want to ask, how many of you are familiar with Android or iOS development? Oh, everyone. Cool. How many of you are machine learning developer or interested in machine learning? Cool. Quite. Okay. Before starting, I am not a machine learning expert. I am an Android engineer who has an interest in machine learning, but with very limited machine learning knowledge. I am still trying to catch up with this area. So let's start talking about MLKit, but before starting, I would like to have a little bit zoom out, talk about the machine learning, because every day we hear about machine learning, we hear about AI, deep learning. When we open the Twitter, we read that, okay, Google launched a new AI tool, Facebook is launching a new machine learning tool. There are so many different terms out there, and it may be a little bit confusing. So I would like to start with the definition of the machine learning. What is machine learning? Machine learning is a subset of AI, an application of AI. But what is AI? AI is the study of how to train computers so that the computers can do the things as good as people do. And machine learning is application of AI, and it provides the ability to system learn from data and improve from the previous experience. And as you may have already noticed, it's quite popular topics nowadays. Everyone is talking about machine learning, AI. And as a developer, I am also interested in, I'm also excited to see some new tools, new machine learning approaches. So But as an Android developer, I'm mostly interested in bringing the machine learning into our applications. I'm mostly interested in combining machine learning and the mobile experiences. But when we think about combining machine learning and mobile applications, it can be a little bit challenging because of some reasons. The first challenge about machine learning and mobile is the team. Machine learning is completely different discipline and mindset from application development. And it requires knowledge, machine learning experience, and it's really different than learning a mobile framework. It's a huge research area, and I don't think we can sit and ramp up in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. It requires a lot of effort and a lot time to learn and gain some experience. And of course, you can take the advantage of open source models, but finding machine learning models which are well trained and super accurate for your problem can be really hard. And if you have any production experience, you know that at some point you have to touch it. You have to fix something, you have to change it, you have to maintain it. So definitely you have some machine learning knowledge and experience. And most probably you will have a separate machine learning team. The second challenge is the data. Finding a good data in the good quality and the good quantity can be really hard. If, as a company, if you think you have the enough data, you are the lucky one. But for the most of the ML cases, the finding data is really hard. And if you have the data, cleaning data and playing with these data, converting into the format you need can be really hard if you don't have any experience with machine learning. The third part is the mobile optimization. Of course, we are talking about mobile. There is no possibility to not to talk about the battery consumption, application size, application performance. And running a machine learning model on limited resources like mobile devices can be really tricky because most of the machine learning models are trained in cloud platforms, and they are really complex and big for mobile devices. So you need to optimize your machine learning model for mobile. And this optimization is also another research area, and Google is also working on it to be able to provide some optimization tools for developers. And the last part is the production. Okay, you have the team, you have data, and let's say you built your application, but how are you gonna maintain it in the production? How are you gonna upload, upgrade, rollback of your machine learning model? You need to think about data, and you need to have some strategies about it. Are you going to bundle this machine learning model into your APK, or are you going to host it on a cloud services and implement the download, upgrade logics yourself? So you need to think about the production and maintenance. And as you can see, these are not specific problem to me or my company. I think these are very common problem for every company which wants to jump in a machine learning area. So these are very common. Google came up with a solution in last Google I/O, and they announced ML Kit. What is ML Kit? ML Kit brings Google's machine learning expertise to mobile developers in a really easy to use package. It's coming with Firebase. Firebase is, I believe most of you are familiar with Firebase since you are a mobile developer. And it currently comes with a collection of predefined capabilities that are commonly required in applications. And we are able to implement these cases regardless of whether we are familiar with machine learning or not. And it's still in beta. It's not generally available yet. And how does it work? When we look at the ML Kit, Google is not doing something really new with MLKit. They just put their existing machine learning tools together and create a package for mobile developers. MLKit runs on the existing Google machine learning technology, so it's not new, but since it's coming with Firebase, it's really, really easy to use, and it's more accessible for mobile developers. What does MLKit offer to us? What are the advantages of MLKit for mobile developers? The first thing is that it's cross-platform. It's supported on iOS and Android, and I believe it's very important to have the same machine learning model in both platforms. So you need to maintain only one machine learning model. And the second thing is that it's easy integration. MLKit is coming with Firebase, which is very well known and widely used tool by mobile developers. According to last Firebase Summit, 1.5 million applications are actively using Firebase monthly. And to be able to integrate MLKit in your application, on Android side, you just need to add a Gradle dependency in your application, and that's done. MLKit API is available in your application. And for iOS, I think it's also easy. I'm not sure about on iOS side. And the cool thing with MLKit is that it supports some common machine learning cases, and it provides some API for them. It provides ready-to-use API for them. So you don't have to think about the machine learning specific stuff like building, training, or optimizing your models about these 6 cases. For these 6 cases, you just need to use the MLKit API and wait for the result. That's done. You don't need to think about the other ML specific problems. But you can think that, is that all? Can I use only 6 cases? No, MLKit also gives another flexibility to us. If your case is different than for those supported 6 use cases, you can always use your own TensorFlow machine learning model with MLKit. But of course, to be able to use it, you need to build and train and optimize this machine learning model yourself, so you need some machine learning experience in this case. And MLKit provides 2 different API for us. It's on-device API and in-cloud API. On-device API is designed to work fast, but of course, since it's running on mobile devices, it works with lower accuracy. And it has an advantage. You can use it as offline. You don't need any network connection for it. And it has another advantage from user privacy point of view. You are not sending any information outside of mobile device, so you are just running on device. And in cloud platform, since it facilitates the Google platforms, of course it provides higher accuracy. But since you need a network connection, you have latency in this case. So to be able to, if you want to use MLKit in real-time applications, you need to use the on-device API. And only landmark recognition case is not supported on device. For the other ones, you can use it on devices. And you cannot use barcode scanning, face detection, language identification, and custom models in cloud. And it's optimized for mobile. As I mentioned, the optimization machine learning models for mobile can be really tricky, and for those supported cases, for the barcode scanning, text recognition, for the 6 cases, it's already optimized for yourself, so it comes for free. But for custom models, if you want to use custom TensorFlow models with MLKit, you need to optimize your model first and then upload it to Firebase. And the last advantage of the MLKit, decouples machine learning and mobile application processes. And as you can see, you can have two separate teams, and a machine learning team can work on the models, machine learning models, training and building the models, and in the meantime, application team can focus on the mobile specific features and release their work to Google Play Store, and machine learning models release their work to Firebase, and all integration between Firebase and the mobile application will be done by Firebase and MLK. So you don't need to think about this integration, and these two separate teams can work independently without blocking each other. Okay, we have seen all advantages of the ML kit. And let's have some deep dive into ML kit and talk about the base API for these 6 cases. Before starting talking about one by one, I would like to give the implementation path, give the big picture of the implementation path, because you will see it's very easy, straightforward, and it's same for the all cases. So I don't want to give the same code again and again for each use cases. I will provide it just once, just to give an example, and then it will be same for the rest of the cases. So the first thing is the integrating SDK. We are adding our Gradle dependency in your Gradle file, and that's done. The next step is preparing our input data. And to be able to work with, call the MLKit API, you need to prepare your data as Firebase Vision image. And you can create Firebase Vision image with bitmap, byte buffer, byte array. We have 5 different ways to be able to create Firebase Vision image instance. And after preparing this data, you need to apply machine learning model to this prepared data. You need to call the relevant API and wait for the response. That's all. This is the whole implementation path, and it's very easy and straightforward. Okay, let's start with the text recognition. What is text recognition? With the text recognition API, we can recognize the text in Latin-based language, and it returns Firebase Vision text. And it's supported on device and in cloud. On device is free, but it works with only Latin characters, so it's limited. In cloud, it's not free. You will be charged after 1,000 users per month, and of course, it works a broad range of languages and special characters. When we look at before looking at the API, what is the benefit of text recognition? It brings the searchability, editability, accessibility, servability, translatability into your application, into our documents. And where can we use text recognition? In the banking industry, legal industry, healthcare industry. In these industries, we heavily depend on the paperwork, and we can make them digitalized with text recognition. And when we look at the API structure, we have 2 different text recognizers for online and offline usage. And we have only one API call, process image. And when we call it, we are getting Firebase Vision text object. It provides the whole text and the list of text blocks. And text blocks provides the list of text lines, and text lines provides the list of words. So you can go deep until you access the individual words with text recognition. And let's look at the code example. The first thing is that we need to create a detector, and to be able to get the detector, we are calling the Firebase Vision and on-device text recognizer. If we want to use the in-cloud text document recognizer, we need to call the get cloud document text recognizer API. You can provide some options here. You can provide some language hints if you want, but it's not mandatory. It's optional options. And after creating detector, we need to prepare our data. And I'm creating my data from bitmap and calling the processing image. we have a detector, we have input data, and we are calling the process image and waiting for the success and the fail cases. And as you can see, it's just 10 lines of code, and it's pretty straightforward. When we run this code on these images, we have the almost same results on device and in cloud API. It could detect the all texts in this image. And for this one, on the left side, it's a screenshot of a digital book. On the right side, it's the output of the MLKit text recognition API. And as you can see, it could detect all text blocks, line, all characters successfully. And some tips for text recognition performance. If you are working on Latin characters, you need to provide at least 16 to 16 pixels for each character. But if you are working with Chinese, Japanese, you need to provide 24 to 24 pixels for each character. Yeah. And with the latest update on MLKit, we are able to detect the language of the given text now, and it supports 103 languages. It can identify Arabic, Bulgarian, Greek, Hindi. It can detect the non-Latin languages as well. Okay, the second case is with MLKit is image labeling. With the image labeling, we can get all entities in given image. It returns a list of Firebase Vision label. And it has the same policy with text recognition. It's free on device, but it can work with 400 labels in common categories. It's pretty limited. With cloud, it can detect 10,000 plus labels in a broad range of categories. And again, we have two different detectors. We have cloud and the device detector, and when we call the API, we are getting Firebase Vision label with the confidence of the results and label and the entity ID. With this entity ID, it's a string. You can use the Google Knowledge Graph API, and you can get more information about this label. And when I'm not going to give the same code for this one, so I'm just giving some examples of image labeling. As you can see, for this image, you can see the differences between on-device and cloud API. Cloud provides many more results from than on-device API, and it provides with the higher accuracies. It can detect all type of the footballs, American football, Britain football, Canadian football. It provides a broad range of results. It's my photo from the previous conferences. And on device, for this photo, on device API, it could detect that it is event and there is a musical instrument in this photo. But in cloud, it could detect that it's public speaking. There is a communication, speech, product, presentation, drink. It said there is a whiskey, but I was not drinking a whiskey. There is no whiskey in this photo. Okay. Landmark recognition. The third case is the landmark recognition. With landmark recognition API, you can get the very well-known landmarks in the given image, and it returns a list of results. It provides the bounding box of the landmark. It provides confidence, entity ID, and landmark label, and the list of location. And since it's not supported on device, you cannot use it offline. You need always network connection to be able to use landmark recognition API. And for this case, it could detect its Milan Cathedral with 0.7. I think it's lower than I expected. And for pyramids, it could detect its Giza pyramids with very high confidence, 0.95. Okay, let's look at the barcode scanning. When I saw that MLKit is supporting barcode scanning, I was surprised because I was thinking that barcode scanning is mostly about image processing, nothing about machine learning. It was interesting for me. I couldn't see why we need machine learning for barcode scanning. But then I realized that I'm forgetting about the noisy images, poor lighting conditions, occlusions, reflections, and low resolutions. My previous project was a grocery application. And we had a barcode scanning, and we had a very similar issue, and we were trying to apply machine learning in this project as well. In some lighting conditions in these stores, we couldn't read the barcodes. We get the wrong barcodes from the product. So in these cases, we need machine learning for barcode scanning, and I think Ocado is another grocery product. In UK, they apply machine learning in their barcode scanning process, and they publish a really good blog post about it, how they improve their barcode scanning process with machine learning. It was really interesting. And with barcode scanning API, we can get all information, address, barcode format, email, photo, SMS, everything. And it supports one-dimensional, two-dimensional, and QR code. And before using MLKit barcode scanner in your application, just check the supported barcode formats, because we also tried to use MLKit in our grocery application, but it doesn't support all formats, all barcode. So just check before using it. And the most interesting use case with machine learning MLKit for me is the face detection. With the face detection, you can get the all faces in the given image and identify some key facial features. You can get the locations of the features, contours of facial features, recognize facial experience, you can track the face, and you can use it in the video, in the real-time applications. We are getting a lot of information with the face detection. We are getting the bounding box, rotation of face, left eye open probability, right eye open probability, smiling probability, coordinates of the left eye, right cheek, left cheek, lots of information. To be able to use face detection, you need to configure your detector before creating your detector. And you can set your performance as fast or accurate. If it is fast, it works fast with lower accuracy. But if you set it as accurate, it works slower, but with higher accuracy. And you can set the landmark mode, all landmarks or known landmarks. And classification mode, all classification mode, or smiling classification, eye open classification. And you can provide minimum face sizes. And you can set the contour mode. And you can enable or disable tracking. If you are using it in video application, real-time application, you need to enable tracking if you need to track the faces. And after configuring your detector, you just need to get your detector, prepare your data, and apply it with the relevant API method, and you are getting a bunch of information about this given image. And when I run this code on this image, it could detect all faces with the written features. It could detect 4 faces, their smiling probability, right eye open probability, all features. And it is tested on Pixel 2. When I run this image with this configuration, with accurate mode, all landmarks, all classification, all contours, it took 2.1 seconds. But when I configure it with fast mode, all landmarks, all classification, without all contours, it took 0.9 seconds. So you need to be careful about configuring your detector while using face detection with MLKit. And this is the recommended configuration for real-time applications. And for these ones, it's very obvious that the left baby is not smiling with the 0.007 confidence, and it couldn't detect the right cheek of the right baby. It's now. It couldn't. And you can get the all contours of the all facial features. You can get the contours of your nose, eyebrows, everything. And some performance tips for face detection. If you want to use face detection, you need to provide 100 to 100 pixels for each faces. But if you want to get the face contour as well, you need to provide 200 to 200 pixels for each faces. And it's not recommended to use the all features at the same time. It's not recommended to face contour detection and classification landmark detection at the same time. You need to pick one of them because it affects the performance a lot. And using face mode is the recommended. And always consider images at a lower resolution. Not try to use a high resolution images. It has a huge impact on performance, especially in the real-time applications. Okay. We have seen all cases supported by MLKit, and we don't need to think about the machine learning specific stuff while using them. But they are very limited. There are just 6 cases, and we need some other capabilities in our application. And what if my case is not one of them, one of those 6 supported cases? MLKit supports custom models. MLKit gives the flexibility of using any custom pre-trained TensorFlow Live models to cover the specific requirements. You need to prepare your TensorFlow Lite models, and you need to upload it to Firebase, and then integrate with the MLKit. So the communication is between the Firebase and your application. And in the next releases, in this case, you need to have machine learning experience because you need to train your model, and you need to optimize it. Optimization is really tricky. You can lose some functionality of your machine learning model. So Google they did the demo at the last Google I/O. They are planning to launch an optimization tool in Firebase. So when you create your TensorFlow model, you just need to upload it, and then you can optimize it with the provided tools. It's not available yet. They just show a quick demo, and they said they are planning to launch it in Firebase, but we haven't heard it yet, anything about it. I am talking about the TensorFlow Lite here, so I just want to give a quick definition of the TensorFlow for those who don't know TensorFlow. What is TensorFlow? It's an open source machine learning framework for research and production. It's developed by Google Brain team, and it's now open source, and I think it's getting very popular in machine learning industry. And I say TensorFlow as well. What is TensorFlow? It's the light version of TensorFlow. It's optimized for the mobile and the embedded devices, and it can run on everything, on GPU, CPU, and it runs on iOS, Android, and the other operating system. And I am closing this TensorFlow part, and of course, after trying these supported ML cases, I was also curious about how to use a custom model with MLKit, and I tried to build a very, very simple application with a custom model. And to be able to use the custom model in your application, this is the implementation path you need to apply. First, you need to train your TensorFlow model. You need to convert it to TensorFlow Lite. And you need to upload it to Firebase and implement the integration code in your application. And I try to, is it working? Yeah. I try to develop this application with MLKit. It's very basic. It's just handwritten digit recognition. And I use this my MIST data set. It's open source. You can download it and you can build your application. And when I did my research, of course, my first step was the hardest part for me because I don't know how to build a machine learning model. So I did some research, and I have seen there is a Keras. It's a high-level API to build and train deep learning models, and it's very user-friendly. It's very easy if you are familiar with Python. And you can use the Google's MINIST model. Google shares a MINIST model in their official GitHub page. You can use this one, or you can use the other one, developed by Tianxing Li and shared on the, GitHub. I had 3 options in this case, and since it's the recommended one, I went to, with Keras. I tried to build my application, my model with Keras. You can find my notebook in these links. I'm not gonna give the all details because I am still not sure why I apply some steps. I have very limited machine learning knowledge. I built my TensorFlow model and exported it and converted it to TensorFlow Lite model. Google also provides a tool to be able to convert your TensorFlow model to TensorFlow Lite model. I just use the TensorFlow Lite converter. And when I tried to integrate it, as you can see, it couldn't detect anything. But during build, it says the accuracy is around 98. But when I tried to, when I finished integrating and testing it, it couldn't detect anything. So I went on my second option, Google Minis. I followed the Google's guideline on GitHub and exported my model and converted into a TensorFlow Lite model, the same steps, and I got this one. I don't know why it is happening. I contacted some Google developer experts and some TensorFlow developers, and also Stack Overflow. I have still no answer for it, but as far as I can understand, during the conversion between TensorFlow to TensorFlow Lite, you might lose some operations during this conversion. All operations are not supported on mobile, so it might happen because of this one, but I'm still not sure. So I had only one option left, simplified minis. I used the guide by Tianxing Li in this link, and I followed all steps, and I think I managed to build it, make it work. I could see it's working. It could detect everything. Okay. Okay, I have the model in this step. So the next step is the uploading your custom model into to Firebase. You can upload different models. You can use different custom models in your application, different and multiple models. After uploading your model, you just need to integrate the custom model API in our application. To be able to use the custom models in your application, if you are bundling the custom model in your application, you need to define a local model source for local model manager. If you want to download it from Firebase, you need to create a remote source for Firebase model manager, but you need to define some conditions for download and upload, update operations. For initial condition, I didn't give any condition. In any case, it should be downloaded. But for update conditions, I put it should be. It should have Wi-Fi connection, it should be charging. And after defining the conditions, I just create my cloud source and register to Firebase Model Manager. And the rest of the stuff is pretty similar with the previous ones. We have one additional step to be able to use custom models in the application. After that, we just need to create our interpreter, create our input, and run it, and wait for the success and the response. These steps are very similar with the previous ones, but we have one additional step before this one. You need to register your local and remote sources. And happy end for me, I could manage to make it work, but it was really interesting experience for me, because it's very easy application, and I have the data, I have lots of examples, but it was painful. It didn't work with the first option and the second option. I tried to optimize something, I tried to understand something. So as a mobile developer, diving into machine learning can be really tricky. Okay. And this is the last thing I want to share with MLKit. I built this application as a demo, very quick demo. I used the object detection model, custom model, and I think I built it in 2 hours, but I think it shows that what we can build with MLKit. It's the intention of this demo is providing a visual assistant for blind people. It just detects the objects and says that, okay, there is people on the left-hand side, there is car on the right-hand side. It's very dummy, you will see it, but I think it shows that MLKit is quite powerful to be able to create this kind of applications.
Person on the left detected.
Do we?
Person on the right and traffic light on the left and car on the left and car on the left detected. Car on the left and car on the left and person on the left and car on the left detected. Car on the left and car on the left and person on the left detected. Person on the left.
Text to speech is very dummy. It repeats itself a lot, but I think it was really straightforward, and it was really easy, and I built this application in 2 hours with MLKit. So yeah, it shows how it's a powerful tool for mobile developers. Okay, what is next for MLKit? According to the presentation by Dong Chen, he's MLKit tech lead at Google, and he gave a presentation at the last Android Dev Summit, and he said that they are planning to improve the performance of the existing use cases, but they are also planning to add Smart Reply API into MLKit, and they are adding much more features from different areas, like especially related to speech, and they are also providing this custom model optimization tool in Firebase. I hope it's still beta. I think it will be generally available maybe in the next I/O. They may announce it, but we are really looking forward to it. Yeah. That's all I can talk about MLKit. Thank you very much for listening and attending.
Does anyone have any questions for Bushra? Brilliant. In that case, please show your appreciation. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're running slightly ahead of time, but we've brought the tea and coffee forward, so the tea and coffee should be almost ready, if not quite ready, in the room just opposite. We're going to come back at 11 o'clock. So 11 o'clock we have CODEMOBILE's Got Talent. If you do have a talent that you're willing to share with the group, please come and grab me in the next few minutes, and we'll arrange our lineup and get that sorted. So yeah, go and have some tea and coffee, and we'll see you in half an hour. Welcome back, everyone. So I've been alerted that there are 2 talents in the room. Has anyone in the room not told me about a talent they would like to showcase? No? Okay. So in that case, we're going to invite our first talented person up to the stage, or more to the piano, which is quite fun. So where's Xavier? Yeah. Perfect. So do you need a microphone?
That could be interesting.
Do you want me to hold a microphone? I can do that. Cool. So please welcome Xavier.
Okay. So I was prompted to do this yesterday. I didn't plan to do it, so this is something I just, put together, and I hope I'm not gonna make any mistake. I heard there was there we go. I heard there was a conference that Chester hosted away from France, but you don't really care for music, do you? It goes like this: the fours, the fours, the ifs, the lambda. Yeah, I haven't done this, do I? The lambda calls and in Kotlin and Swift. The processors compiling at CODEMOBILE, at CODEMOBILE, at CODEMOBILE, at CODEMOBILE, at CODEMOBILE. You know I've been here before. I know the stage and I've walked this floor. I used to code alone before I knew you. I heard you talk on a better arch. Oh, come on. I need my text. I've heard you talk on a better arch, on the better arch. The UI stuff and the AI things, it's all shiny and sexy at CODEMOBILE, at CODEMOBILE, at CODEMOBILE, at CODEMOBILE, at CODEMOBILE. Well, maybe there's a programming god, and all I ever learned from code is how to write a software that didn't crash. It's not just the slides you can read later, and it's not the article link on Twitter. It's a shiny and exciting at CODEMOBILE, at CODEMOBILE, at CODEMOBILE, at CODEMOBILE, at CODEMOBILE. Thanks a lot.
Brilliant. Awesome. Thank you very much for that, Xavier. Our next talent is actually going to be an extension which is going to last some time, I believe. So Joe, come on up. So we were at the pub last night, and Joe is a very talented person. And yeah, she wanted to share her talent with us. So what's your talent, Joe?
Well, my talent is unicycling, but I wasn't very prepared.
So we don't have a unicycle, but we have a talent, which is...
Balance?
So because balance is so great, we came up with a talent at the pub that I thought would be really cool. So Bruno's obviously going to do his talk in a few seconds, but Joe has agreed she can stand on one leg for an extended period of time. So, so what we're going to do, we're going to put Joe over at the side of the stage over here, and Joe is going to stand on one leg for all of Bruno's talk. Is that right? There we go. So if you want to go and take up position... And then what we'll do, we'll award the prize at the end of Bruno's talk. And it will be a clapometer based upon your loudness. And we will see who is going to win our coordination echo dot. So is that okay if she stays there, Bruno? Perfect. So if we could resume, assume the position. Perfect. So now anyway, moving on. We are running slightly early, but that's all good. So I'm going to invite Bruno up to the stage, who is going to give our almost our last talk, our second last talk today. So very, very excited to hear this. So we'll just have a couple of seconds, we'll get him plugged in, and we'll go ahead with that. That's it, just plug you in. You all right over there?
On the left. Yeah.
By special arrangement, he's going to make it a little bit longer.
Yeah. I think my talk is about 1 hour and a half.
Please log on for me.
Oh, sorry.
All good.
Great.
He's plugged up.
Thank
So
you.
yes, please put your hands together and welcome Bruno, who is going to talk about the cloudy device farm in your Android pocket. Have I got it the wrong way around?
Yeah, that's okay.
Android device farm in your cloudy pocket. Give him a big round.
Thanks a lot. Okay, I'm almost ready. There's a few seconds to go. Great. Computers. Yes, here we are. Good morning, everyone. Haha, so you're not dead. Cool. So testing on Android devices has always been a chore in my company and elsewhere. You know, the device fragmentation makes it impossible to touch on each combination of screen size, density, GPU, CPU, and so on. So who has ever tested his application correctly on a few devices? And when it's deployed on a store, an unknown combination of screen size, density, make it crash or not behave like it's supposed to, of course. So when you add to that you have very few devices, but emulators, well, you get the picture. That's why I tried to design a virtual device lab in 2013, which I called Libuli. This lab was never put into production because of network and software limitations. But this year, I'm presenting Podang, another solution that should make it. So this solution uses a farm of real devices. This will help us, and you, maybe, to send your Android devices into the cloud. But no, not this way. So thanks for having me today in Chester for this part of my Mr. What If 2019 tour. So in 2013, we were more and more Android developers ready to test our applications in my company. And to this day, we have around 500 mobile applications. There were already tools to test, but we had to use devices plugged into our laptops or very slow emulators at that time. The real devices were very hard to book and disappeared sometimes, and were often outdated. There is one time when testing manually on your own phone is not scalable enough. To tell you the truth, it was hell on earth. That's when I got the idea of using Android x86 port to crack Android VirtualBox images on demand and to link them with our continuous integration server process, which was Jenkins at that time. We tried to address as many Android versions as possible and made lots of ROM cooking. No, not ROM cooking, ROM cooking. The Android debug bridge, which allows you to connect your machines to Android devices, was limited to 16 devices at that time and binded locally. So we modified the code so that we now had no limit and was able to bind to all IPs. And as Google was about to deliver its L version of their Android operating system, I named that Libouly, which is a famous start of the north of France. Unfortunately, Google did not choose Libouly, but Lollipop. As time went by, I had to realize that our proof of concept could not make it on production because of firewall problems, lack of stability of ADB, and other Jenkins limitations. So, with a heavy heart, I abandoned the project. At that time, a Japanese company named Cyber Agent created a product called STF for Smartphone Test Farm. This product aimed at gathering lots of Android devices and plug them into a dedicated server through USB in order to gain control through a web interface. So this was an internal product. We didn't know anything about it. I then switched to other tasks and kept thinking about Libouly because the needs were still there. 3 years ago or so, they open sourced the code, and after some time, it became clear that it could be used outside of its initial scope. Are you doing okay? Great. I was still on some other tasks at that time, but hoped that someday I would be able to tackle this. Fast forward to 2017, I had the opportunity to work again on continuous integration for mobile development and proposed to make another proof of concept. My new colleague had some Mac Mini hanging around. He's the kind of guy you want to have around you if you're into fancy hardware. Anyway, so we installed OpenSTF on the Mac, and we started from that. I already told you about my choice of Libouly, and this time I chose Podang as a name, as at the time we didn't know the name Google would choose for its next OS iteration. But why are we still interested in a solution to test with distant real devices? Aren't emulators much better now? Aren't there lots of devices in my company? Well, we have some devices, but nobody knows who is using them. The emulators are a real pain in the neck within my company because of our security policy or Windows installation. When you launch an emulator, you've got tons and tons and tons of ADB processes which are launched until it kills just your laptop. So we can't use emulators. And even if it worked, how could we use them for our continuous integration anyway? So our proposal makes a heavy use of OpenSTF, but also goes farther, and I'll try to tell you how and why. So F stands for farm. So the first thing to do is to gather some devices, which may be the hardest part. And then you have to plug them into a USB hub, and then you have to link into a Linux computer running OpenSTF. STF supports Android version from 2.3.3 to 9.0, Fire OS, CyanogenMod, and other heavily Android-based distributions. Root is not required for any current functionality, though you can control your Android device from within your browser. You have the real-time screen view. The rotation is supported, and you can also type text directly from your own keyboard into the Android device. The touch support for devices having a touchscreen works via software called MiniTouch. You have the two-finger pinch, rotate, zoom, gesture support on regular screen just by pressing Alt and then using the mouse. You have the drag-and-drop installation of APK files, and so that you can launch them afterwards. You can open any website in any installed browser. You can also execute shell commands and see real-time outputs. You can display and filter device logs. Then you can use ADB to connect to a remote device as if it was plugged into your computer, regardless of ADB mode and whether you are connected to the same network or not. Android Studio and other IDE are supported. You can debug your app while watching the device screen on your browser on another screen, for example. You can see which devices are connected, offline, unavailable, unauthorized, or unplugged. You can see who is using a device. You can search devices by phone number, EMEI, Android version, operator, product name, and other attributes with easy but powerful queries. You can have a bright red screen when you are searching for a real device in your lab, when you need to locate it physically. You can also track a battery level and health. So as you can see, the website you get when you install OpenSTF is really interesting when you want to make tests by hand remotely. But that's not really our use case. We want to be able to book and use a device when our continuous integration process has finished building our application. OpenSTF proposes a solution for that, and thanks to the use of their API. It's a simple REST API. So for the authentication, within the web interface, you can create a token that you will use later on with a curl command. So you can log in with just a curl command using that token. Once you're logged, thanks to that token, you can get some information about the available devices, get information about one particular device, about the logged user. You can look at the devices that you booked. Congrats. So 7.39, great job. And you can book a device and so on. So the typical workflow would be log in, get the list of devices, choose one that fits your needs, book it, use it for your tests, and then release it, as you would do with the UI. That's pretty cool. We have a Python script that, with just two variables, will book a device for you and allow you to launch your tests remotely. That's also pretty cool. You don't have to know where the device is located. For us, it could be anywhere in my company's venue, and for your future farm, it could be just about anywhere. You just ask for it, and you get it. I'm not a wizard at all, so let me tell you a few things about the architecture of this project. There are several ways to run OpenSTF. Let's start easy with the local version we use for the proof of concept. So, for the proof of concept, we installed Node.js 6.9 or more recent, ADB properly set up, RethinkDB 2.2 or more recent, Graphics Magic for resizing screenshots, ZeroMQ libraries for messaging, and protocol buffers installed to serialize and deserialize data. Package config so that Node.js can find the libraries. By default, Core OS is the supported distribution, but any Linux distribution should do the trick. As we had an old Mac Mini hanging around, we use this, but it's not a platform that is supported because of bugs in the ADB implementation, but for development and test, this proved being enough. So after installing Homebrew on OS X, which would be Linux Brew on Linux, a few dependencies, we had a local OpenSTF server running. We then had to be able to access it from anywhere, whatever the building may be. That requirement we weren't able to meet with Libuli was a signature of his death sentence. So we have a solution for that, and we'll see later on how important this is for us. So with our first version of the POC, our server was reachable from anywhere, despite being in our office just next to me, and then could be used through any browser in any venue. But wait, even if we stop there, would it be our target solution? I mean, okay, we've got a server. We can attach to it up to 49 devices, thanks to several powered USB hubs and USB ports of the machine. But where is the modularity? And where is the failover? Because of the price of the devices, we would have to host the solution in a closed, secured cabinet. One made web server hosting 49 devices in a secure cabinet. What about the network throttling? We could have to send through the network up to 49 videos of the phone screens. And what about the heat generated in a closed cabinet with batteries waiting to explode because of the heat? It does not look like such a good idea after all, rather a recipe for a catastrophe. Fortunately, there is another solution supplied by OpenSTF with slave servers hosting the devices, and a main server will rule them all. So you have to ensure that each of your slave or main servers can handle ZeroMQ, Protobuf, or Docker. So as you can see, there are lots of services, and it's pretty overwhelming. But the reason behind that can be found in the name, STF, which is an acronym for Smartphone Testing Farm. So naturally, this is distributed enough to be deployed at scale. So don't get stuck on this image. It's unnecessarily complicated. It's just there to show that we have lots of different services communicating via ZeroMQ and protocol buffer. We just have to understand and remember that we have two main roles, the provider and the app. Given this architecture, we can run so-called provider hosts, which are merely the physical machines that you will connect your phones to. These will just run an ADB service called ADB and a provider service. At scale, you will have multiple of these hosts. They will all connect to a so-called app server, which run the other 12 services that make up the STF infrastructure. Now, for the app role, the main server, it contains several units as the authentication, the RethinkDB proxy, the storage plugin, the log service, the WebSocket, the API, and so on, all of them communicating via 0MQ. You can distribute these units as you wish on several servers, but we chose to use just one. So, how does this all play together? The website is hosted by the main server called app. If anyone wants to book a device, he has to log in into his account, and once he's logged, he will have access to the list of devices. This list is aggregated by the app server thanks to all the providers who have available devices. So the end user doesn't know and doesn't have to know where the device is located. That's dead simple from the user point of view. So let's have a look at the workflow and the magic glue that makes this possible. So the device is USB connected and provisioned by the provider, which means that the STF APK is installed. Then the provider notifies the app server over the API service on the 80 port. The end user can then connect to the web page via Nginx service of the app server and choose a device. The end user can then connect via ADB from his computer to the dedicated provider that is hosting the device. It's not directly to the device, but to him it looks like he is connected to the device. So the app server then negotiates a VNC access with minicap protocol of a WebSocket on the port 80 to the provider, and then at the end the stream URL is answered to the app service for VNC access, which is given to the final client to the desired Android device. So there is a special VLAN in our company's office for special needs. The machines in this VLAN can be seen from our development laptop, but also from our continuous integration machines and even from other laptops in other venues or countries. This would not be possible if we were using the office network, because of course the firewalls block communication between the buildings and between the sites too. So this VLAN is also available in the server rooms, which means that we can have machines in our office communicating with machines in the server rooms and the other way. That's perfectly what we needed. The app port of OpenSTF could then be hosted in a server room on a virtual machine, and providers could be then in any office of any building as long as we have an Ethernet plug linked to this VLAN, which is not the case by default, of course. You have to justify why you should be authorized to use it. I'm totally aware that our proposal would make no sense if we don't propose a solution to book devices ahead of time. Let's say that the team is happy with the platform as it is, but wants to schedule a test campaign for a whole week. So what will happen if they can't get the devices they need when the campaign starts? A whole week of tests goes to the trash can? And regarding the authentication, there is a mock-up that you have seen, but there is also an LDAP implementation so that it works with our internal authentication system. So as for the booking, we are checking on the pull request 101 and 617 regarding the ability for testers to book some devices for a period of time in the future. So when a device is booked, we will have to inform the managers of the corresponding providers that they won't be available for anybody but the bookers on that period of time. So, what do we have here? With just two variables, you can now book a device, use it for your test, as if it was hooked up to the GitLab CI machine. But sometimes the test can be long, pretty damn long. Fortunately, Spoon, that we already use, is able to do some test sharding. That means that it will be able to use all the devices you can book to run your test. It will slice your test into several groups and then run a group of tests on each device. This way, your test will be finished way earlier than if you use just one device. So this is the way we call the test up to now. We just have to add as many Android STF API lines as needed to book the devices. And there is nothing more to do. The Spoonware script is configured to use auto-sharding so that it will by default execute your test on all the connected devices. So our first proof of concept was working with the Mac Mini under OS X with the VLAN. But as it's difficult to get some money to buy Android devices in my company, so why spend it on some fancy hardware? Furthermore, OS X is not the recommended OS for OpenSTF. You can always install Linux on Mac Mini, as we did later on, but that makes an expensive Linux box for sure. So there comes a knock. It's a dirt cheap x86 box under 170 pounds that could do the job, but where is the fun? And as I am cheap, well, it's still too much money. So here comes the Raspberry. I already had a few Raspberry 3B at home. Who hasn't? By the way, who owns or has already worked with a Raspberry Pi in the audience? Yeah, great, of course. Yeah, more than 90 million have been sold to this day. So I had one with a very bad version of Android TV and another one with Louboutin Mate. The network part is not that good. It's only fast Ethernet after all. And as I had them hanging around, why not try? I thought that not each and every team will be able to afford a Mac Mini or even a NUC. So I did not expect much from it, as it's a slow CPU with only 1 GB of RAM, and overall my experience with Ubuntu Mate was quite lame. However, a few years back, I had played with Raspberry Pi 2 and Docker with a colleague, so I knew Raspberry were usable with Docker. So with the 3B, it had to work too. So onto the building part now. After a few tweaks here and there, I installed Docker C on the Pi. I also needed Docker Compose, as OpenSTF orchestrates lots of different containers with Docker Compose. Unfortunately, Docker Compose was not available for Ubuntu, so I had to rebuild it from source with the help of Docker. So you have to build locally a Docker image and use it to generate the Docker Compose binary. Later on, I started everything from scratch again, this time installing Raspbian. It was more natural to use it on the Pi and more performant too. The process to prepare a Pi for OpenSTF was now simpler. Just install Raspbian, install Docker, install pip, and install Docker Compose thanks to pip. Later on, I discovered another distro called Epriot OS. The guys behind that distro called themselves the Docker Pirates to express their rebellious and anti-establishment attitude. As most people were only concerned with Docker on big servers, they went the opposite direction and asked themselves how to use container technology on really small devices. They believe that Docker can be even more useful on small devices than on big servers. I think they're right. So Epriot OS is a minimal Debian-based operating system that is optimized to run Docker. It makes it dead easy to use Docker on any Raspberry Pi by just downloading and flashing a prepared SD card image. So from start to finish, it takes less than 5 minutes to get started with Docker Compose, Docker Swarm, or even Docker Machine on Raspberry Pi. Then I thought I had scored a home run. Just launching Docker Compose with the OpenSTF repository would do the trick, wouldn't it? I was wrong. Even if Docker images can be executed on any platform running Docker, these platforms have to be for the same processor as the one the image has been built for. Of course, images built for x86 can't execute properly on ARM processors. OpenSTF provider image hasn't been built for ARM, neither the other images composing it. So I had to rebuild the main image on the Pi because I had some modifications to make, but also the other images on the dependencies. It was not such a big deal after all. Just create a new ARM image based on Alpine Linux, reference it to build the other images, change a few dependencies, and wait, and vent, and wait, and wait, and after some time you get what you are looking for. So I was pretty happy for 5 minutes until I realized I could not use our continuous integration to build it. All this work around OpenSTF is to make it possible for our users to test their application within our continuous integration. I build my Docker images, my soft, everything with that CI, which is tightly linked to the x86 architecture. So it's not such a good idea to build my images directly on the Pi. So if I can't build them on the CI server either, what in the hell am I going to do? Then I thought, Docker Hub has to be able to build my images as the Alpine Linux image I found was there. I then copied all my repositories to my GitHub account and was almost sure I would get a fresh Docker image for ARM processor 5 minutes later. Bummer! Once again, I was wrong. Docker Hub is also based on an x86 architecture and can't build ARM images. At that time, I just did not get how the Alpine Linux image made it to Docker Hub. I then spent some time thinking of using a Pi cluster to build Docker images, found lots of modifying examples, and then real ARM servers, which looked perfect for the job until I saw the price tag. I made a little bit of research and quickly realized that even if it worked perfectly, it was not such a good idea to put the SD card under such a high level of stress. With a good heatsink, you can torture your Raspberry quite a lot, overclock it, make it do heavy computation, but writing often on the SD card will greatly shorten its lifespan. So, what could I do? My CI server can't handle building my images, Docker Hub neither, and doing it as a Pi will kill the SD card sooner or later. Back in 2013, Resin.io, which is now Berlina, ported Docker to the ARM processor. Shortly afterwards, they wanted to use that to offer ARM build to their users. However, ARM server hardware was difficult to find at the time, so they started looking for an emulated solution. Enter QEMU. QEMU is a wonderful project aimed at emulating other CPU architectures. So, how can this be used to emulate a whole container? Since the container can only access its own private file system, the first step is getting the emulator in the container. So this simply means copying the executable in the image. However, building the above image produces a not such descriptive error. The reason for this error is that QEMU ARM is a dynamically linked x86 binary, which requires a lot of other x86 binaries that don't exist in the image. So the loader tries to find the files, but fails, and so reports no such file of directory. So the easiest way to fix this is to use a statically linked version of QEMU, which will have no dependencies on its environment. So creating one is just a matter of grabbing a copy of the source code, running configure with ---- static, and then make. After this, the statically linked executable will be in QEMU ARM, Linux user, and so on. So as you can see now, using the statically built QEMU binary now works within the container. There are several other steps to emulate a whole container, like loading a specific module of the kernel, improving the syntax, and so on. So once all of these steps are done, you are then able to build an ARM image within Docker Hub with that kind of syntax. I then felt like I had invented the fire. Later on, Shippable allowed to build ARM Docker image directly from GitHub sources, and of course to push them to Docker Hub. I don't have to destroy my SD cards anymore and wait the whole day in order to build a Docker image. I can do it on powerful ARM hardware and for free. So, what do we have now? A working STF provider on the Raspberry Pi with phone connected to it and images built on Docker Hub or Shippable. That's a pretty nice first step in the right direction. Down the rabbit hole now. The OpenSTF ARM image is not up to date with the OpenSTF x86 image, so another long journey began. Trying to update the ARM image proved quite difficult because the updated versions of the different products composing it, with, for example, with ThinkDB, Node, NPM, and so on, were not easily compiled on ARM. So I opened quite a few issues on the various projects. I'm still waiting for fixes on several of them. Then, as I had discovered other Linux distros like Armbian or Ypriot, I began to dig and found that the Raspberry Pi 3B had an old sock and that there were tons of other more recent ARM socks with better performance and lots of other SBC makers that produce other cards that I had to try. So I also had to try and build my own images for the candidate board that I thought would be useful for me, but I've been telling you about SBC without even explaining this acronym. So let me say a few words about that. So SBC stands for Single Board Computer, so a computer made of just one board. These computers are built around a SoC. Yes, another acronym, stay focused. So SoC means that on a single chip you will find a CPU, a GPU, RAM, and other chips that are used to control the board hardware. GPIO, USB sensors, LCD screen, and so on. So most of the time, these cards will run a version of Linux based on Ubuntu, but lots of them also can run Android. Android, really? This led to another experimentation, more of that later on. So lots of these cards are really technology jewels for quite cheap. The downside of it is that the manufacturers don't really care about the code quality or documentation. So once that you have bought them, you're really on your own. Orange Pi manufacturer, for example, makes good SBC for very little money, but the OS they ship with it is pretty lame. Their Android version is based on a very old Linux kernel and is not very stable. And their Linux version is a shame, almost unusable. Fortunately, there is a real community of die-hard fans that build regularly kernels for these boards and even complete distros like Ambien. So I've been able to make some tests with some very recent kernels on some of these boards. And there is another specificity that makes it difficult to start tinkering with this board, which is the U-boot. So it's an open source, cross-platform bootloader that provides out-of-the-box support for hundreds of embedded boards and many CPUs, including PowerPC, ARM, Xscale, MIPS, and so on. But if your card is not handled by U-boot, you're stuck. I won't detail it now, but it's almost as if you had to develop your own BIOS for your PC, but without the specs of the board. So we had OpenSTF running thanks to Docker on a Raspberry Pi and giving access to the phones plugged into its USB port. That's a pretty neat solution and quite cheap too, but my curiosity was aroused because the Orange Pi SBC I had spotted were all supposed to be able to run Android. So what if I could use them instead of phones? That would make sense money-wise, starting at £8, and would maybe be better in the long term than phones because of the lack of batteries and case. So why not try making an Orange and Raspberry smoothie? So I then got myself an Orange Pi 1 Plus. So this board is built on the all-winner H6 SoC. It runs at the same frequency than the Raspi and supports the same amount of memory. It's a 4 Cortex A53 cores, and it's an ARM V8. It can handle as OTG, so we can connect it to any computer running OpenSTF. I gave it a good end-user test and hope that it could be seen by OpenSTF like any other Android device. In case this would not work, we could still use it instead of the Raspberry Pi and all Linux because it has more or less the same performance on the paper. So I plugged it into the Pi and waited. The OpenSTF website running on the Pi never showed the Orange Pi. The logs told me later on that a piece of software called MiniTouch was not able to deal with that kind of device. The problem is linked to the lack of touchscreen, of course. So I wanted to try workaround, so I had to build it, deploy it on NPM with Travis, and build another Docker image with it on Docker Hub. A pretty frightening process. So back to the rabbit hole. To this day, the problem is not yet solved, but at least I have the workflow to make it progress. So the Orange Pi 1 Plus is then out of the picture for the time being as an Android device. So where were we at that time? Raspberry Pi is running OpenSTF but can't handle Orange Pi yet because of MiniTouch. So we are still using a Raspberry Pi and phones. That's cool. But can we do anything cooler with that what we have on hand? So what about using the Orange Pi as an OpenSTF provider then? For this project, I decided that cheaper was cooler. So as we use the Orange Pi 1 Plus is less than half the price of the Raspberry Pi, let's go for it. Well, the support in the mainline kernel for this SoC is not ready yet. And the Linux kernel that shipped with it is way too old and too buggy to run Docker. So this board will be very good and cheap at something like £15 for hosting an OpenSTF provider, but a few months from now. So it's out of the picture for Linux too. What about Orange use now? The 1 Plus has an older brother, which is smaller. It's the Orange Pi 0. So it's even cheaper than the 1 Plus. It's around about £8 and supports only 512 megabytes of memory. I was not really confident about this SBC being able to work as an STF provider, but I was wrong. Even if it swaps a little bit, it's powerful enough to handle 4 phones with STF under Ambien. With the latest Ambien developments on RAM management, I think this card could be the target one. As for its use with Android, of course, it suffers the same problem with MiniTouch than the 1 Plus. But as soon as the community will have solved this problem, I think the combination of a 0 plugged into a 0 could be the cheapest and the smallest STF farm on Earth. Now, what if we could make our OpenSCF provider beefier? Our target platform is really cheap and good enough for a few phones or SBC, but what if we have more devices to plug in? The CPU power is not enough for more than 4 Android devices, and regardless of the CPU power, if we ever want to get the screen video stream, which is not our use case, the fast Ethernet won't be enough, and the memory is already full. So what are we looking for? A better SoC, faster Ethernet, and more memory. There are lots, in fact there are too many candidates for that job. Even the latest Raspberry Pi, the 3B Plus, sports a faster SoC, 1 GB Ethernet and 1 GB memory. So why not just keep it to our first idea and just use a Raspberry Pi? Well, there are several good and bad reasons. The Raspberry Pi is called by some overpriced piece of and the SoC is quite old, even of the latest 3B Plus, and Raspbian is a 32-bit system on a 64-bit SoC. You can switch to Arch Linux, for example, which has a 64-bit build for the Raspberry Pi, or to OS, but the community around building distros for the Raspberry Pi is not that big. Armbian doesn't want to touch it because it doesn't use U-boot, but a proprietary firmware. So the major pro of using a Raspberry Pi is its community. And the major cons are its hardware and its price. So what would you choose? Quality or community? Would you like to have tons of people help you make a LED blink, or have the key people help you set up your own Linux distro for a best bang for the buck SBC? Yes, I chose quality. Next, the cool factor. Having something unusual and more powerful than a Raspberry Pi is way more cool. Okay, I admit it is not really a selling point. So this Odroid XU4 is more expensive than the Raspberry Pi, but it supports 2 GB of memory, eMMC, an octa-core CPU, USB 3, and a very recent Linux kernel on Armbian. This makes a top-notch OpenSCF provider. Now, what if we were using exotic pieces of hardware, like Ethernet switch or a TV box? In fact, at work or at home, we are already next to tons of ARM-powered hardware. So this particular piece of hardware is a ClearFog router with a very powerful SoC and 6 Ethernet plugs. So why not use that with OpenSCF to allow for more devices on the same SBC? I know it's not a router, and it's a router, sorry, and not supposed to be running OpenSCF, but I don't care. It's kind of pricey, but OS is already running on that bit, so it would work just out of the box. But let's keep focused. I said we wanted something cheap. There are tons of cheap TV boxes in the wild, on Amazon, AliExpress, DealExtreme, and so on. These kind of boxes for £16 to £90. So some of them are sporting a powerful SoC, have lots of ports, and can run Armbian. So for the price of the Raspberry Pi, you can get a working TV box with its power supply and remote control, running Android or Android TV and Armbian able. That's super cool. I'm currently investigating this field, but that's not a plug-and-play solution, unfortunately. I don't expect to have a complete solution based on a TV box soon. But that's really interesting to me, as some of them are running Android and not Android TV, as they support OTG and Armbian, which means that we could build an Android device farm just with these TV boxes used as Android devices, but also as OpenSCF servers. What I'd like you to remember from this talk is that if you have an idea and little to no money, you can set up a proof of concept for cheap. You will be able to find recent Linux distros with recent kernels and some SBC with enough memory to be usable for your proof of concept. You could also run various versions of Android or even build your own Linux starting from U-boot and Linux kernel. There are lots of uses for Docker on such small cards as a server or as a client. As some of them implement power over Ethernet, you could just hang them somewhere without any power supply and let them operate. Most of these SBC support GPIO and USB ports so that you can plug sensors or hats on top of them and interact with the outside world. You can also quite easily set them up so that they will work in a cluster. More and more SBCs are launching every month, and as time goes by, more and more of them become candidates for becoming a part of the Podeng farm. So for the Android ones, I'm looking for the one which support USB on the go, so that they can be seen with ADB. And for the Linux ones, I'm looking for a recent kernel, so that I can get a recent Docker version 2, gigabit Ethernet, USB, and DDR4 when available. But when I find a new card that doesn't have all of these features, but at a bottom price, I have to test it, however. The NanoPi 503, for example, which I have there, has just about everything. Gigabit Ethernet, USB, OTG, and sports the same price tag than the Raspberry Pi 3B Plus. It's around £30. And it has twice as many cores as the Raspberry Pi. This card has proved being really useful as it works wonder with OpenSCF as an Android device, as it doesn't suffer the mini-touch problem, and also as a provider server running with Docker and the Linux. At £30, it's not really cheap enough for my taste, but it's a serious candidate. And before I present you another card, I'm sure some of you are asking themselves, okay, using SBCs instead of phones does not solve the fragmentation issues, does it? No, no, for sure, it does not. Our first goal was to make a proof of concept for cheap, and it was a success. Our second goal was not to tackle the fragmentation issue, but to quickly set up a device farm on a limited budget. Of course, there were devices spread among the company's venue, but it would take some time to gather them and to convince teams to set up their own part of our device farm. And the third goal was to have a bootstrap, a workhorse, so that the teams that don't have specific needs regarding the manufacturer UI, the carrier UI, the battery, or the network could start testing right away for cheap. So to these days, these three goals are met. Now, time for last board. Lafrit board has lots of cool features, but only fast Ethernet. It performs better than the Raspberry Pi 3, but the price tag is totally crazy. It's £4 for the 512 megabytes version, and £8 for the 1 gigabyte one. Can you believe it? £8 for a card that is more powerful than the Raspberry Pi and that can run a very recent version of Android and of the Linux kernel. Our microscale farm, which is not this one, and even not this one. Yeah, this one. Our microscale farm is a mess. I mean, our microscale farm is not a final one. All these different boards are difficult to arrange properly. So I know I told you about a workhorse, and what I have just shown you looks like that. So it does not look good, but it does work. Each and every month, we could make another study and find a new set of cards within our price range. But for the time being, we'll keep on the Orange Pi 0 set. But I'd like to set up another one with Lafrit. So now, get your Raspberry Pi out of your drawer or out of your pocket and install OpenSCF provider server on it with Docker Compose file. Maybe you don't have a server somewhere able to be used as an OpenSCF app server. Bad luck. But you know what? You can use one Raspberry Pi for the app server and as many as you want for the provider servers. But wait, there is more. I tried it, and the standalone OpenSCF server can be used on one single Raspberry Pi. So long for the modularity and long live low budget. I'm just kidding, but that should be helpful if you want to get a foot in the door. So a whole working SCF provider and app can be hosted in that kind of device. I don't say it will be fast, but it will work for sure. And the good news don't stop here. Are there any iOS developers in the room? Whoa. Okay, great. Last August, OpenSCF main developers said that iOS support was in their roadmap for this year. And there is an issue in OpenSCF GitHub repo regarding iOS, and it is still alive with new input from last month. So this new effort targeting iOS is not dead, and I have high hopes that it will happen this year. Our project has already hit production We are currently using it without a glitch. Everything, despite the documentation for the time being, is available on GitHub. And if you already have phones, an old PC or a Raspberry, don't hesitate to start tinkering with that. And maybe let us know when you throw them into the cloud. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Questions? Anyone? No? In that case, let's put our hands together and thank Bruno.
Thanks a lot. You're welcome.
Awesome. So that brings us to the final session of the day and of the conference. I can't believe that we're almost at the very end. It feels like we've just started. But we're just going to have a very quick changeover. We'll get Chris up here and we'll be with you in just a couple of minutes. Stuff looked very, very clever.
Thanks a lot.
It's certainly worth a play, I think, at some stage.
Oh.
Oh yes, you know what?
You forgot to
I forgot about CODEMOBILE's Got Talent. It's really bad. So unfortunately, Xavier has had to leave, but we can still have our clap off for Xavier and Joe. So Joe, did we work out she lasted 7.5 minutes? 7.5 minutes was Joe standing on one leg, and we had Xavier's wonderful song. So if you think Xavier should win, let's hear it. If we think Joe should win, let's hear it. You know what? I actually think that's quite decisive. I think we've got to award to Joe. So Joe, please come up to the stage. I'm also going to ask Code Nation to come up to the stage. They've got a wonderful prize for you. Do we want a photo? Is that the plan? Let's have a photo. Let's do that. Happy days.
For obviously exceptional and outstanding talent.
Exceptional talent.
Was across the board within the room. Congratulations. And well done.
Perfect. Very good. And let's get Chris up onto the stage and we'll get you set up, Chris. Happy days. Big round of applause. Well done, John. You on Mac?
Yeah.
I definitely plugged that in.
Okay.
Might just need to change.
That's 1 second.
No, just go into your display properties.
So let me just make sure this is up. Oops. No.
Do you want notes or not?
No, I've got one separate.
So go to cancel. Just gather the windows. And one be I want to change that. Scale 1080i, sorry. Okay. Yeah. No. Just confirm that. That was changed.
Still nothing.
Give me a second.
Oops, sorry.
Awesome.
Okay. Oh, I'll start from the beginning. Come on.
Thank you.
There's another one.
Wicked. Okay, so Chris I've known for many, many years. We met originally at iOS Dev UK probably 6 years ago, 7 years ago?
Yeah, something like that.
Maybe
yeah.
even longer than that. Didn't talk for many, many years after iOS Dev UK, and then randomly bumped into each other last year. Over at NS Manchester, possibly,
Yeah, I think
somewhere
that's
over
where
there.
it was, yeah.
He was at CodeMobile last year. I gave a fantastic talk on Cocoa Pods. We've actually been talking quite a lot about Cocoa Pods over this week because your directories are kind of dying. You know, I think we were talking about sort of Swift Package Manager and all of those sorts of things, which seem to be the future. But it was still a very good talk, which was good. So we invited him back this year. And the final talk of the conference is accessibility without the APIs. So please welcome Chris.
Right, thanks very much, Steve. Right, good afternoon, everyone. As Steve said, I'm Chris Barker. I'm the senior iOS developer for Brown. When this moves across, 1 second. Brown Group, you might know us for our fashion brands, which are Simply Be, JD Williams, and Giacomo. We also do Fashion World as well. We're a small mobile app team, about 10 developers in total, working to push out iOS and Android branded apps. So, what got me started on accessibility? So, this kind of talk started about 12 months ago, and I was doing lunch and learn at Brown on the architecture of the Brown app, as we call it, which is kind of all the apps put together. And I touched on a little bit about how we use accessibility to aid our UI tests, and how, you know, if you was to write good UI tests, obviously the KIF framework that we use lets kind of piggybacks off the accessibility identifiers. So if you write good UI tests, you're going to help yourself out with accessibility, and vice versa. And it picked a few ears up, and a few people came over to me, and someone did the question session at the end, and everyone was asking bits and pieces. And one person said to me, "Do you follow X, Y, and Z standards?" And I was kind of like, "What?" I was like proper like rabbit in the headlight moments, and I was like, "Yeah, I think we do." So obviously, I ran off and had a look, and it turned out that these standards that we're talking about were more apps and websites based in the public sector. But it got me thinking about accessibility, and the fact that that wasn't on my radar at all, and it really should have been, because I've worked in public sector before with websites. I thought we need to do a little bit more to make people aware. So it got me thinking about a podcast that I heard, probably getting on for about 12 to 18 months ago now. It was the iDeveloper Code one with Scotty and John Fox. And they recommended this book, which is Accessibility for Everyone by Laura Kalbag, which is this one I've got here. Obviously, it's mainly web-focused, but it's got some really interesting points, and I actually just want to read a little paragraph out of it, if I can. So, one of the things it says here is, the distinction between universal and accessible design is subtle but important. Accessible design considers the needs of people with disabilities. So, for example, accessible design might result in a building having a wheelchair ramp attached to its far side as an afterthought. It might not be convenient for people using wheelchairs, and is unlikely to be used for people who find it faster to use the stairs, but at least there's some form of access. So I'm not going to go into too much of that right now, but I'm going to touch on that a little bit later. But it was a really interesting and powerful paragraph. But like I said, I'll come back to that. But it's a great book from cover to cover. If you've got any interest in accessibility, I do recommend you getting hold of a copy. So this got me going about accessibility, and after reading the book and after doing that small talk at work, it was kind of like, right, okay, inspirational email day. So rattled together about 10:30 at night, email about accessibility and how we need to think more about it and what can we do to think more about it. And it coincided with Global Accessibility Awareness Day, which is a group of people who have got together around the world who I think it's every third Thursday in May. They come together, and it's just basically a blog post or people with general awareness about it. It's mainly focused around web, but there's no reason why we can't try and push apps into this at all. So like I said, inspirational email went around at work. What can we do to make this better? So one of the things that we started to do, obviously I touched on before about how we use the UI test to aid accessibility and vice versa, is one of the first things we did is updated the coding standards document at work and said, basically, we've got to do this. We've got to look at accessibility when we're putting new features in, whether it just be adding the identifiers in, the labels, or anything, because even the small differences, you can add in makes a big difference. For example, you look at one of our apps with the banners on the front. The banners that get uploaded to one of the Simply Be apps, they've just got random characters in front of them. without the accessibility identifiers, they're just going to read out them random characters and mean nothing. You know, you put the labels in, it takes 5 minutes to do that, if that, and you've got access for your UI tests in there, and straight away, and you've fixed access, not fixed, but you've kind of helped support accessibility, and it's just them little things that make the difference. So I was thinking, what else can we do? You know, how further up the chain can we go with this? So, you know, and I was chatting to the product owner about it. I said, you know, it's okay for us as developers to put these into the app, but we need to get more people, we need to get more buy-in from the business. So that's anything from the product owners, from the UI and the UX guys, you know, and even to upper management. Let's just, you know, not teach them, but let's kind of preach a little bit more about how important accessibility is, which is kind of where this talk all kind of come along to. So, let's see now. So I thought to myself, okay, right, what do we have as a user? What do we have in terms of available options as an iOS user? So accessibility, this is the current accessibility options that are in iOS 12.1.2. The one that I'm going to be more interested in today is the display accommodations, and which will lead on to where this talk's going shortly. And it was interesting because I had a chat with a friend who's quite he's been on the UI UX scene for many years now, quite well respected. And I said to him, you know, he's worked in web and mobile. I said, what's your thoughts on accessibility? Where are you going with this? And he kind of said to me, he said, well, he said truthfully, he says we only really care about it for the web. And I said, well, why is that? He said, well, doesn't iOS and Android take care of it yourself? And I was like, well, no, not really, no. So again, it's that thought process, you know. And I'm not saying that he speaks for everyone out there in the UI UX world, but it's just that was his view, and I'm sure others share the same as well. So I thought, okay, let's have a look and let's see what options are available. So obviously we're going to go through all these. I'm going to go through not all of them. I'm going to go through some of them shortly. So again, I'm collecting all this information, thinking, okay, well, what is this about accessibility? We've got this area here, we've got the developer side of it, we've got the business buy-in, we've got, you know, what people think about it, you know. And then one day I met a girl called Neve. Now, for those of you, I know some of you know me in the room, I have a 12-year-old daughter, and like all 12-year-old daughters, they have a BFF. And her BFF is a girl called Neve who's 13. I was chatting with Neve one day, and it turns out they was doing some homework at my house and with my daughter, and it turns out she was writing on yellow paper. And I said, what have you got yellow paper for? And she went, well, I've got Erland syndrome. I was like, oh, okay, what's that? So she started to explain it a little bit to me. And basically, it's a subform of dyslexia, which kind of affects people in many different ways. So it's actually, the official title is it's a perpetual processing disorder. It's not an optical problem, I've been told. She's quite keen on letting me know that. It can manifest itself in many different ways, things from fatigue, eye strain, headaches, print, and many more. Neve's specific issue that she has with it is print, which is what we're going to come on to. And this is kind of the yellow paper that she wrote, and these are the notes that she wrote for me for the talk, all on the yellow paper. So this is what she has to do every single day in school. And then she has to cut it out and put it in school books. So it's just yellow paper like that. She also has a yellow overlay as well, Perspex overlay, which for going over for reading books as well, which is quite interesting. I couldn't get one of those in today, but anyway. So what effect does this have? I don't know, what effects does it have on Neve? Well, to her own words, basically, words on paper move, disappear, they multiply, and the letters jumble up. And also, sometimes in between spaces, there are little squiggly lines as well, moving around. And for that can lead to headaches, just basic frustration for a 13-year-old, you know, ends up slamming the book down. But more importantly, I say more importantly for this talk, slamming the phone down. So I said to her, I said, okay, this is interesting, kind of, about how, you know, you deal with this. I said, so how do you get on with phones? And she goes, do you have the same problem? She says, well, yeah, I do. Right, okay. So yeah, this is her comment. So words just jump across the screen was one of the phrases to use. So I said, okay, so tell me about the apps that you use on a daily basis, as I'm interested. So I started to kill out an idea for things I wanted to ask and avenues I wanted to explore. So obviously, no surprise, there are 4 favourite apps. So you've got Instagram, Snapchat, iMessage, and Gmail. So Instagram, basically, generally okay, she said, with using that, because obviously it's predominantly images. But when it comes to reading captions or direct messages, forget it, game over. It's too much. She literally uses it just for the pictures, nothing else. Again, Snapchat's fine for the pictures, but anything comes with the message side of it, which I didn't realise it had, but anything to do with the message side of it, again, it's just a jumble. It's a no-go for her. iMessage is one of the ones that she does actually favour, because of the blue and the green, depending if she's sending an iMessage or a normal SMS text message, it does actually help her a lot. She's able to do that. She still has the problem, don't get me wrong, but it's just a little bit easier. And this was the big one for me, which was Gmail. Gmail, she said, is just an absolute nightmare. It can be, anything from, say, something like 3 or 4 paragraph email. It's just, she'll have a go, she'll try and read it, but ends up just putting the phone down and getting someone else to do it for her. She can sit there with the overlay over a phone. That kind of helps a little bit. But obviously, you don't want to be walking around checking your emails and having to go and grab your overlay like that. I mean, who's going to stand on the train like that going with the overlay? Or, you're hanging around in the playground at school like, oh, I was checking your phone. Hold on, let me just get my overlay out. So, it's not going to happen. So Gmail was, like I said, short sentences, not as bad, but still a problem. All right. So I ran another, so I thought, okay, I'm going to do a bit of a case study here on based on how she interacts with shopping apps. Obviously, was being at Brown doing the shopping apps. I was interested to see, how it might affect some of our customers. So I give her a case study, and what I wanted her to do, I sat there with her and I said, okay, I need you to 2 scenarios. First one is I want you to sit there for 2 minutes now, searching for a birthday present for my daughter, her best friend, Madeline. Okay, no problem. So during that 2 minutes, what I was doing is I was chatting away. She was searching for products. I said, full concentration, searching for products. And within that 2 minutes, I kept tapping her on the shoulder, like distracting her, taking her eye away, on purpose. She didn't realise I was doing it. She just thought I was being irritating. But every 2 minutes, I just kept tapping her on the shoulder, Neve, look at me, Neve, look at me. And I think she was going to hit me at one point. But she just kept tapping. Okay, so 2 minutes is up, brilliant. So I said, well, okay, done that now. I said, right. I said, I was purposely irritating you then. What I want you to do is do the same thing, look for a different product for your mum, look for some jewellery, something like that. But I want 2 minutes looking at the phone, no distractions. And I mean, silence. And she did it again. So basically, so I asked her on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being absolutely fine, yeah, no problem whatsoever, 10 being, oh my God, this is going to make me throw up. How did the 2 scenarios kind of pan out? And she said, well, with the distractions, it was more of a 6 or a 7 out of 10. But with full concentration, it was more of a 4 or a 5. So actually, the distraction, her looking away and coming back, actually caused more of a problem. I actually thought it would be the other way around. I thought the distraction would let her rest for a moment, put her concentration back on, but no, because she had to reconcentrate. Which I thought was interesting, because obviously going back to the Gmail scenario, where she's concentrating on all the words on the screen, multiple paragraphs, that was when it became a problem. So it all depends on what you're looking at in the context. It's different for every scenario. So the next bit is, so that was quite interesting. So the next bit was understanding what I call the colour preference. So the colour preference is, again, going back to this yellow paper. Now, obviously, Neve uses yellow paper to write on. She uses the yellow overlay, but it's not just yellow that works for everyone with Irlen syndrome. People can have red, blues, I think there's even a green as well. One of the things that she said is, I thought was quite good, you don't just get prescribed a colour. And she actually wrote that in these notes here, because you don't get prescribed a colour, it's what works for you. And more or less it's that, throughout the entire time that you have the problem. It tends not to change from what I've been reading. Other people have said, if they've stuck with red from an early age, red works for them for a long time. So will it solve it for everyone? Well, you're not going to be able to turn around. If I solve this problem for Neve, not that I said I can solve it, but if I did, is it going to solve it for everyone? Well, the answer is straight, no, it's not. So it moves on to the next section. So, okay, well, as a user now, not as an app developer, as an app user, as a mobile phone user, iOS or Android, obviously it's predominantly iOS-based talk, what options do we have available? So going back to the accessibility options we saw before, there's a few there, and there's a lot more than this, but I picked out the ones that I thought were more relevant to the topic. So obviously there's night shift, which we all remember from, I think it was iOS 9.3 that came out. Increased contrast, smart and classic invert, and also reduced white point. So I thought, okay, I'm going to run these same tests with her, no distractions, using the app with each one of these features turned on, and just see how it went. So obviously, first of all, night shift. And basically, it was an oh my gosh moment when she started using the app. She said, this is so much better. Can I have this on all the time? Because obviously I started off by telling her it's scheduled between, I think, 11 and 7 by default. But yeah, there is a you can have this on at all time button. She was gobsmacked. She had no idea that this existed. Immediately this was like, yeah, this works perfect. This is great. And so I said, okay, go back through the Simply Be app, do the same test again. Yeah, fine. And I mean, it was dropping it down. So I think she said it's between a 3 and a 4, you know, for 2 minutes. 2 minutes, both with disturbed concentration and with full concentration as well. And she was absolutely over the moon. She's actually still got it on now. This from when I first did this case study with her. So that was great. So then I repeated it again with increased contrast, which apparently improves readability with increased colour contrast and text styling adjustments. So flicked that on, did the same test again. Said slightly better than without any options on, but again, it was all about this night shift at this point. You know, she was really enjoying the fact that this night shift. I really should have probably left that to last, but anyway, I just went in the deep end with that one because it was literally, and I mean, you know, even like I got a text message off her mum saying, "Can I have this night shift on as well?" I was like, "You don't have Irlen syndrome," but anyway. So yeah. So then the next one was the Smart Invert and Classic Invert, which is, I call it iOS dark mode, right? And I'm sure we've all played this a few times. Basically, it inverts the whole colours, and it's really weird because when you do a screenshot of the invert, it comes out like that when it really should be black. I thought it was, you know, obviously it shows you that it's not changing the skin, it's not changing the colour of the canvas or anything like that on iOS. It's just obviously some display technology that's being used. So, but I think I'm sure we've all seen it before. As like I said, some people call it dark mode in iOS, apart from the fact it does mess up all your apps. So again, same with that with Smart Invert and Classic Invert. She said 4 and 5, maybe 6 on that 1 out of 10. It did help, but I think the fact that it just didn't look cool at all, and she didn't want to walk, you know, because like who wants to walk around school with that on the phone and going through all the apps or flicking it off and on for apps that, you know, she needs to see images and pictures for. So it was good, but again, it was still about this bloody night shift. So and the last one I tried with her was Reduce White Point, which reduces the intensity of bright colours. So flick that one on, and basically, not much difference. Okay, fair enough. So I thought that was interesting to see that, and it was really interesting that there was just no idea that she could go into accessibility settings and play around with this and try and find something that was suitable for her. And I know part of me was shocked, but then at the same time, part of me was like, well, do you really expect 13-year-old kids to know this? And again, I don't know. It's, you know, where do we need to put the awareness? Something I'll touch on the conclusion, but I found it really interesting. It was a real eye-opener. So one of the next things I asked myself was, do the accessibility guidelines help for developers from us? So, well, actually, I was quite shocked, actually. Yes, they do. And this is taken from Apple's human interface guidelines on the site, and that bottom paragraph, use sufficient colour contrast ratios, I thought was really interesting because there's no real mention there about using an API. It is what it says it is. It is a guideline. It's kind of was a bit of a changer because when I started originally writing this talk or getting the idea for it, it was all about, hence the title really, it was all about, you know, forget about the APIs, forget about this, we've got to make the difference as developers. But actually, you know, Apple kind of see that there is a problem there, and they do kind of give you a point in the right direction. So it's definitely worth, as developers, just every now and again refreshing yourself with this and thinking, you know what, am I doing everything here? You know, I've dotted the I and crossed the T's in terms of the app structure and the guidelines that Apple want me to follow or advise me to follow. So after that, I thought to myself, okay, so what do other apps do? Hashtag dark mode. So I looked at a few other apps, predominantly looking at, obviously, other shopping apps and also the apps that Neve uses on a daily basis. So Instagram, WhatsApp and Facebook, ASOS, Boohoo and Twitter. Now, the reason I put Twitter at the bottom is a good reason. Majority of them, predominant colour is white. And when I say white, I'm not just talking about any white, I'm talking about like DAS, whitest white. You know, and it's natural, we put things on a white background, you know, and there's nothing wrong with that, don't get me wrong. But it's just what we do. Obviously, Twitter is one of the apps that does have a dark mode. And this kind of goes back to the kind of the comment in the book section of the book I read earlier, which was like, you know, I trawled the internet to try and see if there was anything about, you know, Twitter putting the dark mode in for accessibility reasons, or, you know, is it for that, or is it just because we're geeks like having dark mode? Because, you know, I like having dark mode on my ID. You know, is it for that reason? And I couldn't find anything at all, so it made me think, well, is that been a bit of a bolt-on? Is that, oh, you know what, we'll put dark mode in, it's going to help with accessibility. You know, again, which is fine, because it's better, let's face it is better than doing nothing. But it's interesting, the majority of them were predominantly white. So it's kind of moved me on to one of the last case studies, which is the interesting one for me. So it's what little differences can we make to our apps that you know, that will automatically make this a better experience without them having to think about accessibility settings, without having to think about be aware of dark mode and night shift and stuff like that. So what I did is I thought, okay, I'm going to make some changes to our app. So obviously, whiter than white. White is the colour. So I thought, well, the first thing I was going to do, I'd look at the various shades of white. This is taken off the web. I looked at that and I thought, oh, a little bit harsh that, because we don't want to go full dark at the end. So I decided to go a little bit more subtle, and I moved up what's called the monochromatic scale of white. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to move that up in increments. I'm going to change the app, the background of the app on the product list page, and I'm going to get Neve to run the two tests again, with or without distractions. So first one I did, which was here. So I changed the background to F2, 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 and it was, yes, it was slightly better, you know. The words didn't jump out a little bit, didn't jump out as much as they did before. Still jumped around a little bit, you know, which can be quite frustrating, you know, because you look at something like that and you think, why am I seeing the word denim there? And obviously, because you don't know it's a denim jacket, and the words are all jumbled up, you know, she'll be at one point reading denim scarf and stuff like that. But the words were still jumbled, there's still them snakes in between the lines, but she didn't have to concentrate as much, which was a start. So I moved further up the monochromatic scale, E5, 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 and she basically said it's the same. There was no difference there whatsoever. So right, okay then. So they went up a little bit more, to D8, and she says much better. So at this point now, you know, she's saying it's now a 6 out of 10. It was still no night shift, but it was 6 out of 10. And then I did this. So I got her what she sells, non-prescribed colour, and I put that in the app. Bang, straight away, yeah, that's better than night shift. That's a 3 out of 10. Straight away there. You know, and she said, I could sit and read that, no problem. I could choose a product, it wouldn't cause me a problem. That is perfect for me. And I thought it was really interesting because it was, you know, obviously we're not going to turn around and you know, you're not going to have a settings page in everyone's app that says you can choose your background colour. You know, it's just not going to work. But it is just about those little things. So, you know, we're not going to turn around and start saying to people, yeah, you need to do this, you need to support every variation of you know, the prescribed colour for people who have Earlham syndrome, because that would just be crazy. But you could take a step back and you could maybe look at doing something that's much better, or something that's, say, you know, slightly better than before. You know, it's just about finding that balance. It's about understanding more than anything. And that was kind of the end of the case studies, really. So the conclusion to all this is, well, I initially wanted to come here with a solution, and then after thinking about it more and reading into it more, I've not actually come here to share a solution. It's just more of an understanding of what's going on. You know, there's various different avenues that you can take to help tackle this problem. You know, you can go back to where I started with, just adding basic, you know, using the APIs, having basic accessibility into, you know, that'll aid you as developers with your UI and your accessibility handling. You can read up more about the APIs and see what they can do. You can learn more about you can read up more on the developer guidelines. Ask yourself, how would you fix a problem for someone that you know who has this? You know, what problems do they have? Or, you know, maybe review your app, review your guidelines, review your coding standards. It's just see how you can incorporate the little things within your app. It's just more of having a general awareness of the problems that are out there. So one of the things is just basically, you know, one of the questions I think I'll leave with today is, what can you do to help someone with an impairment? The chances are if you do help them or find a way to help them, you are helping someone else as well. So, and that's everything from me today. So thank you very much.
If you did decide to put these colours into your app to support Erlands, is there any resources that give you the actual hex values? Tell the exact colours
There
to
is,
use?
yes. I think if you go to that link, I'll put it in the. I've actually got some there. There are the links that I shall show them. Yeah, they don't give you the exact hex values, but they give you the rough shades of it, so you can kind of play around and work it out. I tried a couple of different ones with Neve before I got the bang on colour that I wanted, and yeah, so there's no exact colours.
Hello, nice talk, thank you.
Thank you.
So I know on Android, not sure about iOS, but there's the possibility of having colour filters over the top of everything.
Yes,
That's
yes, there is. Yeah, there is on iOS as well. Yeah.
Yeah. How did you find something like that?
Say again, sorry.
Did you test with something like that with her?
I didn't know. I thought I didn't want to go down every single avenue, you know. And the original focus of this talk was to do it more from a developer perspective rather than. But I still, as I read more into the fact that iOS does give you these options, I thought it was good to touch on it. But I wasn't going to do. Yes, you can have color overlay filters on in iOS as well. But again, it's more about that awareness. She wasn't even aware that night shift existed at this point. So to go in and to start messing around with colors and stuff like that was, you know, is kind of, I think, too deep really for a user to understand. I think it's more how can we solve it. Or what I wanted to try and get across was more how can we solve it as developers. But yeah, there are options as well in iOS to do that.
Great, thank you.
Cheers.
Anyone else? In that case, please thank Chris.
Thank you.
Awesome. And with that, unbelievably, we've come to the end of CODEMOBILE for the third year. I can't quite believe it's here. It's absolutely flown over this week, but it has been absolutely phenomenal. I've really enjoyed it once again. I hope you have too. Just a few things before we finish off. On a personal note, I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody who has helped with the event or participated in any way. First of all, to the staff at the back, so Andy, to Steve on the camera, to Andy who's been doing the photos, to Bella who's been on reception, also to Lauren who's been a massive help in reception as well, also my mum who was around, some people met her on the first day. Thank you, huge amount for everything you've done, because really, genuinely, the event couldn't happen if it wasn't for you. There's a lot of prep beforehand, but when you get to this week, you know, I need other people around me, otherwise it just wouldn't happen. So can we please give everybody at the back a huge round of applause? Also to our fabulous speakers, because I think, you know, the event really is made by the amazing talks we've had, and I'm constantly humbled by the amount of people who apply to speak every year. It's a huge task to wade through all of the proposals we get and to try and work out, you know, who we can actually put into the schedule. I'm going to try next year and see if we can make that potentially a little bit more public. So what we might do is have something where we ask people to submit a talk and then give people the option to maybe one-up the talk on the website before we actually agree to put it in the conference. So we're going to explore those sorts of ideas for next year. But in any event, this year, once again, I think everyone would agree the speakers have been absolutely fantastic. So a huge round of applause for our speakers. And also to all of you guys. So a huge round of applause for all of the attendees. Thank you. Couldn't happen without you. Once again, just want to mention our sponsors. If I can find the slide. It's in the wrong order, sorry. genuinely, this event couldn't happen if it wasn't for the generous support of people sponsoring. The conference dinner on Tuesday night wouldn't have happened if Compare the Market hadn't come along. Also, Oscar Technology, they've been great. Capital One, with the T-shirts, the goodie bags, all of those sorts of things. Also JetBrains. So thank you to everybody who's got involved, sponsored the event, and also the previous sponsors from previous years. If your company is interested in getting involved, you know, we are a community conference, and there's all sorts of opportunities to add value to the event. You know, this isn't about sort of, you know, making lots of money. It's about, you know, finding ways we can just do additional things for you guys as attendees and really just make that conference a little bit bigger or a little bit better, and do some extra things. So if you are from a company that might be interested in getting involved in sponsoring, please do let them know for next year. I send a call to speakers out usually around October, sorry, a call to sponsors out around October, November time. So if you could push that with your companies, that would be really appreciated. But in the meantime, huge round of applause for our sponsors. And the great news is we will be back. We're coming back next year. Haven't got the dates yet, and the reason for that is I'm relocating to Nottingham next week because I've got a new job. So we're actively looking at whether we hold the conference in Chester next year or whether we potentially look to hold it somewhere else. Potentially Nottingham. Surprise, surprise. So exploring those ideas, and that's why that question was on your feedback form. It's not set in stone by any means. The important thing is obviously you guys are the attendees, you guys are the people who are coming. So it matters to you that, you know, obviously you're where the conference is. So I really want your feedback on that. But I'm actively exploring whether or not we do it at a different venue. But in any event, it will happen. It'll happen in around April time, you know, around the same sort of time of year. At a university, we'll have accommodation and all of those things. So watch out for that. I'll send out emails and everything to make sure you all know when the dates of the conference are. And when tickets do go on sale, if you use the code attendee2019, you'll get 10% off your next year's ticket as a thank you for coming to this year's event. So please do use that and buy your tickets for next year. There'll be early bird tickets on sale probably around July time, just around as we open our call to speakers. So look out for that. And that's it. That's our conference photo. That is CODEMOBILE 2019. Thank you very much. Have a safe journey home, and hopefully see you here next year.